นี้ฮัลโหลเปิดโอเคค่ะสวัสดีแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะดิฉันหทัยการกมลศรีสกุลเป็นตัวแทนจากบริษัทไทยวาธรรมเสกและ Rethink นะคะขอต้อนรับทุกท่านสู่งาน Southeast Asia Agri Food Roundtable นะคะ Welcome back everyone to Bangkok and also on behalf of Temasek, Taiwan and Rethink I would like to welcome everyone officially to the second Southeast Asia Agri Food Roundtable. My name is Cam and I'm going to be MC for today. And joining me as co-MC is Sophie Brady from Rethink Events. And you'll hear a little bit more from her later. Last year, we hosted the first Southeast Asia Agri-Food Roundtable. We had over 130 delegates from around the world, thought leaders and innovators. And this year, we have even more. And hopefully, this full day agenda will be very action-packed and will be very fruitful for everyone. And before I invite Renho onto the stage for the keynote opening, I'd like to invite everyone to watch the video from last year. Agenda on your table, please scan the QR code. At lunch, we have prepared a very special lunch for you from our partners in Southeast Asia, and we hope you enjoy. The events today will end at 4:30, but the networking continues. We have drinks and live music up at the Saffron Sky Garden. Please do join us there. By the end of the day, we hope you leave here feeling very, very energized and ready to catalyze a greener tomorrow with us. Please join me in welcoming Ren Hua, CEO of Taiwan.
Good morning, friends and colleagues, and great to see everyone here. This morning when I was at the outside session of cocktails, I saw a good friend, Alex Ward, and the first thing he said, Ren, it's been a year. So how many of us actually we were here at the inaugural edition last year? So probably about, I think, a bit less than half the room. So what happened last year is when we started the first post-COVID event for SEA 2022, we really wanted to bring together an audience in the room to really create a community and platform for what we called the Agri-Food Roundtable. This is an idea that we started 2 years ago in conjunction with Temasek and Rethink, because we believe that a lot of agri-food and how we think about building the ecosystems is very much systems and very much interdisciplinary across different aspects of agriculture, food, and obviously today we think about decarbonization. This year, when the conference chair Cam and the team thought about what kind of theme should we promote in terms of catalyzing a green tomorrow, the core thesis is really to bring about that ethos of how do we merge different themes across agriculture, across food, across decarbonization, and bring it to life in our part of the region. Southeast Asia is, of course, one of the most interesting, populous regions for all of us. It is home for many of us who live in Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia. And today we're really excited to have over 180 delegates, speakers, participants from across the region to participate in the second edition of SCA 2023. For many of us, when I met old friends this morning and catching up on some we met in the US, some we met in Singapore, 2023 feels like a bit of a time tunnel. It feels like in 2023, what we passed through, from January until now, has accelerated at a pace, particularly as we think about the post-COVID opening, at a pace that really drives a lot more change and a lot more transformation than ever before. Today, we think about where we are, particularly in our part of the world in Southeast Asia. Essentially, we're at an inflection point of different themes that cut across the region. And that's a founding ethos for the spirit of SCA 2023, to really cut across different themes and be able to coalesce and integrate different ideas, different conversations, different collaborations. So starting with climate change, I think it's apparent and in some ways inevitable as we think about managing and preparing for a hotter future over the next 5, 10, 15 years. How do we think particularly about climate resiliency? How do we think about the use of water and tie that back to the value chain, very importantly for farmer communities and agri-food systems? We then move to aspects of soil and agriculture. A lot of the focus over the last 2 years for Taiwan has really been managing on the upstream part when we think about farmland, soil degradation, disease, and drought. Today, Taiwan, we work with over almost close to 100,000 farmers across the entire region in tapioca, rice, mung bean. And thinking about weather risk and extreme weather risk and preparing for climate resiliency is front and center of our daily business model and our operating model. In the afternoon today, once we look at the upstream part on different aspects of farm and agriculture, when we come to the afternoon, we will have interesting conversations around the future of food. So if we think about agriculture as a long value chain from farm to shelf, from the farmer to the producer to the distributor to the food, the future of food is going to be very interesting as we think about what are the new types of food systems, what are new types of novel foods and plant foods we can bring to bear in a way that we can actually accelerate a lot of the food transformation systems from our part of the world to serve a global audience. And finally, the last part will be really around health and nutrition. As we think on a post-COVID era, the way we think about health and nutrition and being able to integrate that in terms of different types of consumer products, in terms of new types of finished products, is going to be increasingly important for us to manage as an ecosystem going forward. At Taiwan today, when we work with our various partners around the world, today we operate in 7 countries across Southeast Asia, primarily based in Thailand, but also China, now India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia. We like to think about the circularity of the agri-food system. And the circularity of the agri-food system, and the beauty of this is that when we look at the different aspects in the value chain of how we participate, it starts with the farmer and how we think about crop productivity. We then move to factory and communities in terms of managing production value, managing downstream, managing agri-waste. It serves then to the family and the consumer, and then it comes back around in terms of the byproduct, how we think about food, how we think about fiber, how we think about fuel. So the circularity of agri-food economy, particularly in our part of the world, is extremely important. As we think today, when we operate, from farm to shelf, of the different products that we take from Southeast Asia and the biodiversity that we have for raw material and feed and fiber, and transform that to different value chains, it is not only linear from a business point of view, but it's increasingly more circular as we think about driving that change into new types of innovation. A case in point, a simple example, in Taiwan, we started using our byproducts for different types of new applications. So we use a lot of the tapioca pulp that we then convert into a byproduct for bioplastic packaging. We're starting to use some of our tapioca fiber to process an animal pulp. So going forward, I think as we think about the agri-food system as one, is not just linear from a simple business value chain, but the idea of circularity and actually driving change over time will be very, very important. Right now, we serve over three main countries as we think about regenerative agriculture and we think about farming communities: Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And we started the journey really focusing on the farmer at heart. The 100,000 farmers that we work with was built up over time. For example, when we did soil testing, working with our partners in India and partners in Thailand, to look at how we can actually test the efficacy of soil. We then built greenhouses across the region, and then we worked on adding different layers of soil improvers, which really increase soil productivity by over 10 to 15%. I cannot overemphasize the importance as we think about agriculture, food systems, and particularly about climate resiliency, about starting at the farm level. Last week, I was with the team, and we spent probably over about 1,000. We drove over like 1,000 kilometers over 3 days, traveling across different parts of Thailand. Next week, we're going to Cambodia. And when we think about the resiliency of our food systems and what we're trying to address, the importance of starting it at source in terms of farmer productivity, crop resilience is going to be increasingly important and challenging, and therefore the need for different solutions and collaboration to come to bear. This is an example of how in Cambodia we launched, and we were the first in Southeast Asia to get the SEI certification. A big credit to the team that had prepared 1 year for it. And that brought to bear different aspects of sustainability and traceability. So not just from a sustainable perspective of bringing together farmer best practices, but as Taiwan today and many of our partners and many of the leading corporates in Southeast Asia, CP and Thai Union and so on and so forth, the traceability back to the farm level, how they actually can look at the right type of codes, the right types of farmer practices, the right type of quality audits, the traceability back to the farm level, individual farm communities, will be something that resounds a lot more with customers as they're trying to bring forth more value conversion and agriculture products in time to come. This is another example of how we tried to pilot our own sandbox in CQ. So this is an agriculture mulch film. You can see, if you look at that little picture, that's actually Kun Kam, our conference chair. The lady with the 2 legs up. So her daytime job is head of our farm team and strategy, but then this is a nice picture that the team was jumping. And that's actually mulch film. So that's actually biodegradable mulch film, which we lay on the ground. I think it helps to increase the moisture retention and the soil retention over like 60 to 90 days. But this is an example of how we think and we believe with many of our partners here in the room that the pioneering of agricultural food systems is really in the field. It is easy for us, and it's important for Taiwan to spend a day a year to bring together the best and brightest from around the region. But the work and the sweat is the other 364 days that we spend creating in the field, working for collaboration, spending time building our partners. And we're taking a lot more of a ground-up approach by building different sandboxes, by different trials, and being able to actually scale that across different parts of the world, starting with Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and likely India next year. And finally, a last point on technology before I hand over to prepare for the rest of the conference. One of the most fascinating things, and I think our good friends Anthony from Ego will be here, Ego Genomics. Shout out to Anthony, big round of applause. Welcome, Anthony. Flew in from the UK. Welcome, Yvonne. And Anthony was the first one, and I always borrow from him every year. Anthony is the first one who says, Ren, the future of food or the future of agriculture and the idea of microbiome is from soil to gut. There is so little that we know about, first of all, the human microbiome. But second of all, there's even much more to know about the soil microbiome. And if you think about living matter, organic matter, microbial content, the intersection is what we see about agriculture, food systems over the next 5 to 10 years across different disciplines, starting with food science, intersecting with aspects of molecular biology, now intersecting with material science when you look at biopackaging. The aspect of integration that we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years is increasingly important. And we hope that what we can do as part of this SEA Agri ecosystem is to bring together that collaboration across different disciplines. So we've got companies, we've got brands, we've got researchers coming from different aspects of the value chain and really putting together something which is far more unique and far more powerful for the long term. Last year was our inaugural session. We had, I think, about 75 different companies, 150 different corporates joining us. And this came from entirely across the region. Today, we have about over 180 people. about 1/3 from Bangkok, about 1/3 from Singapore, and 1/3 from a very much more diverse international audience who really dared to brave the traffic jams of Bangkok and fly into Bangkok on a Monday night and get stuck with us. But the point being that, as we think about why we do what we do, and as we think about broadening the ecosystem and the purpose about building agriculture, food systems, we believe in Taiwan, in partnership with Temasek and Rethink, that's about building a coalition and collection of different aspects, representatives from corporates, venture, innovation, researchers across the entire region. Today, we welcome more than 150 partners across the entire value chain and different sectors. And the domain expertise, as we think about agriculture, I see everyone taking out their photos. I'm going to post it on LinkedIn 30 minutes after this. I don't even have a TikTok account. And I don't even have an Instagram account. So my son, I've got an 8-year-old son who has a birthday coming tomorrow, and he's asking me, Dad, why don't you have a TikTok account or an Instagram account? And I'm like, I'm in agriculture and food. This year, we welcome over 150 delegates across the entire spectrum. So I'm going to move so you can take a photo and post it on LinkedIn. But more importantly is that we hope that the SCA Roundtable becomes a community, becomes a platform. There's entirely no expectation from Taiwan and Temasek's point of view for this to become a super large event. Last year, we started with 130 people. This year, we have 170. Next year, we'll definitely cap at 200. It is our motivation and our purpose to really make this a one-day intimate event. When we come back among friends and colleagues and partners, you build together the collaboration, you follow up on the projects, you discuss new investments, and building the bridges in a much more intimate setting. And this year particularly is very unique because we have a lot more guests, about over 1/3 flying in from outside the region, particularly from India, from Israel, from China, from the US. And we believe that Southeast Asia as a hub can really serve the rest of the world in transforming our agriculture systems. So the final point is that why do we do this? And what is that raison d'etre as we think about today, and we think about tomorrow, and we think about the subsequent time to come? We hope that when SCA 2022 started last year as the inaugural edition, SCA 2023 will be the second edition. I told Anuj, Taiwan, we will anchor and we will champion this for maybe about 10 years. Let's see if I get too old, 10 years from now, or potentially 20 years from now. But we believe ultimately in building a community for growth, for sustainability, and equal balance. This is our home. As we think about the future of Southeast Asia, it's our home for over 600 million people. It's got the best biodiversity in the entire region. It is a very important bridge in time to come, particularly in regard to the populous regions of India and China in terms of regional food security. It is also very interesting and very important if we think about the future of geopolitics, where today, Taiwan, we're having to reshift supply chains, where our customers in the US, they don't want made in China. Our customers in China, they don't want made in the US. So we think about the future of conflict and the future friction in the global world, the role of Southeast Asia as a hub to provide that agri food security as a strong production hub and innovation hub to serve the large countries of India and China is going to be profoundly important in decades to come. It's a very biodiverse region. We've not even scratched the surface of how do we tackle these issues around erosion, soil degradation, improving biomass, and the richness of species in different aspects, not just Thailand, but also Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. It's something that we can bring to bear in time to come. And finally, economic development. We deeply believe here at Taiwan, and many of our partners and many of our institutes around the region, that agriculture and food is a source of economic development. We do hope in 10, 20 years from now, as we think about supplying the world with more food, better food, cheaper food, healthier food, that at the same time we can also have a strong catalytic effect on helping the farmers in a world that's going to be hotter, going to be tougher, going to be more stressful, but ultimately seeing how we can build platforms and build bridges for catalytic change in time to come. The final point, the final note I'll leave you today, and I look forward to seeing many of you throughout the rest of the conference and tonight's edition, is when we think about why we're here and we think about what we're trying to do today and tomorrow, is a tagline that myself and our Conference Chair Cam we came up with, which inspired us to start this and really catalyze tomorrow. And it's a very simple one. If you think about agriculture, you think about food, you think about the determination, the patience, the sweat. There's one simple tagline that I'll leave you with. If not now, then when? If not us, then who? I look forward to seeing many of you and welcome you to the 2023 edition of SEA Agri-Food Roundtable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renhua, for kicking us off. And now I would like to transition everyone to the first panel of the day on driving climate smart, resilient, and smart farming in Southeast Asia. And joining us on the panel, Kathy Marsh from ADB, Ram from Jiva, Ryan Rakeshore from Temasek, and Dirk from Rabobank. And again, inviting Renhua to moderate the panel. Please join us on stage.
So good morning, everyone. This is the warm-up panel, as they say. Hopefully but once we get to like 11 o'clock, there'll be a lot more chatter and Q&A. And then after lunch, people get a lot more exuberant, a lot more excited. So for the warm-up panel, really excited to have, distinguished list of speakers to really start with probably the source of agriculture and food. And as we think, talking about, as I mentioned, about the transformation of the value chain for agri-food systems, the source of food and the source of agriculture starts with farm level. And farm level resilience, crop productivity, dealing with climate stress is a theme that we're trying to articulate and explore in today's panel. So I thought to kick off the start, I'll probably go around the panel and ask each of our speakers to share with us, as we think about, from your organization, about the role and the future of climate resiliency in regards to farming, in regards to farm communities, what are some of the key aspects that each of your organizations are focusing on right now? Can we start?
Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Marsh. I'm the Deputy Director General at ADB's Private Sector Operations Department, based in Manila. So pretty used to the rain from when I arrived yesterday. But so what do we do at ADB in this space? ADB, we provide loans, we provide equity investment, we provide guarantees, and we provide technical assistance in this space. We're very focused as an organization both on climate change more broadly. We are the Climate Bank of Asia and the Pacific. That's our goal. And we have committed to $100 billion of our own money in climate finance by 2030. Within that, we also focus very strongly on food security. And that's a major area of focus for us as an organization, both on the private sector side and the sovereign side. And last year, we announced a $14 billion food security response across what we call our developing member countries, 48 member states. And $3.5 billion of that will go to private sector. Farming is a critical industry in Asia. 80% of the world's smallholder farmers are right here in Asia. It's about 400 million smallholder farmers in total. And so a really important focus for us, and I'm delighted to see this gathering today. I think it's absolutely terrific that we've all come together to talk about this really important topic for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ren. I'm Ram. I head Jiva Ag based out of Singapore. We are an ag company. We work with smallholder farmers, primarily currently in Indonesia. We provide 360-degree services to smallholder farmers, providing inputs, providing financing, buying produce, and also providing advice to improve yield. In the context of climate change, climate resiliency with smallholder farmers, we work closely with hundreds of thousands of farmers in Indonesia. And the key challenge that we think in solving for that is around how do we enable the farmers to access these technologies and solutions, the barriers to access, and the challenge around change management that, that we are trying to facilitate farmers to make change in their farming behaviors that have significant risk associated with making those changes. They are to do with whether the gratification is immediate or postponed. They are to do with the uncertainty of those solutions and changes that we are advising them to do. What is the risk mitigation for them, because it's the highest involvement decision for them. The whole livelihoods depend on that. So those we think are the key challenges in being able to drive climate resilient practices among smallholder farmers. And that's of course not any single company or single country can solve that. But it's a multitude of agencies that are allowed to work towards it, and I hope we can have some conversations around that.
No, thank you, Ryan. I think the point about risk management and risk deduction at the farm level, the ground level, and catalyzing that over time is definitely a topic we'll come back to. And how do we bridge that gap with aspects of not just technology, but partnership and different bridges? Thank you. Yeah. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'm Ryan Rakestraw with Temasek. I'm based in Singapore and a director with the Food and Agriculture Group. We're very excited to continue to be a partner in this event. We think that it's something unique and also needed for the region. And I think the agri-food value chain is, this is very much kind of a human experience, farming, producing food, of course, consuming food, which I think we're all excited about that for later in the day. And it really requires people getting together. And Ren, you talked a lot about collaboration. I think fundamentally, that's what we're most excited about in this event, the spontaneous get-together for people who don't necessarily know each other or see each other on an everyday. And really, that's our goal for catalyzing this, is to see some collaboration, see some investment, to see folks working together to drive innovation and solve some of the challenges in the region. Temasek, as an agri-food investor, our group has had a dedicated focus on this space for roughly 10 years. We've invested a little bit over $8 billion across 60 different portfolio companies globally. We are investing across the food and agriculture value chain, whether that's upstream, midstream, downstream. We invest in more mature and established companies, as well as a wide variety of less mature and innovative companies. And I guess just speaking a bit more personally, I only moved to Asia in August of this past year. I was based in Temasek's San Francisco office. And much of my experience has been kind of America's orientation up to this point. We have a corn and soybean farm in Illinois, is our family farm. And, but I sense and I feel, everything that you've been discussing, that really the opportunities to drive sustainability, to drive change, to drive improvement in global food and agriculture, I think is really in this part of the world. And so, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to learn. In some sense, it's learning some of the differences and challenges here that really make it exciting. And Temasek is committed to making an impact in the region.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for joining us. And I think the serendipity of those what they call the hallway conversations, the coffee chats, I think a lot of that is really the intention. And the intention when we think about building SCA successively over years is to continue those conversations and to continue that serendipity. So thank you for joining us, Ryan. Dirk, welcome.
Thanks, Ren, and thank you for the invitation for Rabo to introduce ourselves to this panel. We weren't there last year, but we will intend to come, the next 20 years, as you just mentioned. I'm Dirk. I represent Rabobank. Rabobank is a Dutch cooperative bank, which is an all-finance bank in the Netherlands only, but outside of the Netherlands, we focus only on financing the food and agri system, as we call it. We are one of the largest farmer finance institutions around the world. And on top of that, we also are a corporate bank that facilitates our corporate clients that are attached to the food and ag space to make the transition, because that's the focus of Rabo's global long-term ambitions, to facilitate the food system transition, because we are convinced that we need to transition our food system towards a more sustainable and more resilient a platform. And as Ryan just mentioned, I'm from Europe. I've been in Asia for about 10 years, and I'm really convinced that the food system transition starts and gets momentum in this part of the world, simply because the necessity is biggest. We have 50 or more than 50% of all the consumers living here. We have the largest density of cities in Asia, and all these cities need to be fed in innovative ways, in my opinion. And last but not least, as Kathy also just mentioned, most of the smallholders are in Asia, so we need to supply the biggest share of consumers that have been urbanized in the densest way through a supply platform of smallholders. So our ambition in Asia is also to embed these smallholders in supply chains, and technology is going to drive that, in my opinion. And we will ultimately touch, I think, on these topics. Carbon credits, blockchain are all going to be part of that transition. But most important, in my opinion, is not the technology that is or is not available, but it's the ability for farmers to adopt the technology. So we need to find ways for farmers to be embedded in these supply chains, for them to finance investments and reap the benefits of the technologies that they invest in. And in my personal opinion, that cannot be in a stand-alone, smallholder or farm entrepreneurship. It needs to be a supply chain governance solution that we are looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dirk. And it resonates that as we think about Southeast Asia as a relatively nascent, fast-growing region, I think the maturity of the ecosystems in Europe and the US and different parts of the world is a lot we can learn from. Some parts we can adopt and adapt, some we can't. But we are many, many years behind in it, but that's where the promise is also to develop new types of infrastructure. And the infrastructure that we are trying to build starts like this, right? It always starts with human capital, of infrastructure, of collaborations, and then it leads to financial capital, and leads to investments, and then finally leads to hard infrastructure, factories and assets and tanks. But the social infrastructure around Southeast Asia, around getting 150, 100 people in the room, just talking, conversing, is something that I think is very dear to us. So we'll definitely pick up on that point, Dirk, about how do you think the region will unfold in terms of the momentum that you spoke about. So onto the shift, now that we've got to know the speakers a bit better, onto the shift a bit more into a key topic that I think Ram alluded to around adoption, right, and on risk management, because ultimately, it's scaling it in the field and converting behavior real time, right? When it rains, when there's a drought, the tractor doesn't come, the machine breaks down. So starting at the point on risk reduction, or around the challenges, the potential, systems thinking around adoption in general. Any thoughts to share on what has worked, most successfully for Jiva over the last few years, and how you managed to transform that?
Yeah. So there are two parts to helping change happen. One is the financial or economic model. Are you able to create an incentive that is more of an instant gratification rather than a deferred gratification, either through pricing or through financing support, that makes it an obvious or an easy economic choice for the farmer? But that's only a small part of the challenge. The bigger challenge is, how do you mitigate that risk of change? And the uncertainty, if you're asking for a different kind of a farming practice or different implements to be put, either it's an investment risk or is it a change related to crop yield risk. One thing that we have realized is, building that trust base is critical to making the change happen. And that is not built overnight. The smallholder farmer communities have to see the agents of change as someone who is competent and is well-meaning and who has skin in the game, in the ground. So you're participating, you're selling to them, you're giving financing to them, you're buying from them, you're engaged in the community over the short, medium, and long term, and they understand that you have your interests aligned with theirs. And that, I think, is, well, it's not a quick solution, but doing that, and it's probably will take a few years of doing that, then when you demonstrate certain changes as in their interests, I think change happens. So even when we are giving, let's say, a farming advice, an advice like where it's a pest and disease detection, where we are providing some specific solutions to that, that's easy thing to take it to the farmer. But when we are trying to provide farming advice around what should be the planting practices or tilling practices, or how do you do this to prevent this or enhance yield, that change is hard. They've been farming in a certain way for generations. They understand that is the process that they understand and they trust. Changing that requires an agent of change that builds that engagement and trust and ground presence on a continued, sustained basis. Only then you'll be able to make the change happen.
So essentially starting with the trust factor is critical, and then over time you build that agency. Just shifting a bit to Ryan, I think we spoke pre-panel around from Temasek, so let's link it still to the theme around technology adoption. From Temasek, you invest globally, so you see things at a global scale. From a global perspective, how would you think about this issue of scalable technologies? I know there's some very interesting technology in our portfolio. And then triangulate that to just underlying issues around farmer adoption takes time, it takes effort, it takes trust.
Yeah,
So bridging between technology and trust, which I know is the hardest question, is kind of the holy grail of agriculture, but love to hear how you think about it from a global perspective as well.
Yeah, in terms of scale, or to start off with, it has to be a technology that fundamentally creates and provides value. I think that's where it starts off, and then has to do so in the local or regional context, and then think about that across crops, across geographies. And so, that ends up kind of being something that requires, a technology underpinning, whether that's, something new in the biological space or something new kind of in the software space as well. So, and kind of generally applying some of the principles, both on the ground as well as kind of taking what's available in the financial technology or artificial intelligence, these types of things. So I think that's the highest level. I think we absolutely appreciate Ram's point around kind of farmer adoption, risk mitigation, those sorts of things. And now I'm just kind of bringing it down. In the region, I think what we've seen is most effective is that you can be a technology company. You can have your team of data scientists or plant biologists or that type of thing. But in terms of adoption, it comes down to that last mile. It's the farmer interface. That's where the trust is. That's where the transfer of agronomic knowledge, the transfer of practice. And so, that is equally important to have a great technology and team, that is fundamentally creating something of value. But then how that gets delivered to the farmer is equally important. And I think that, maybe from a U.S. context, where the distribution of things like farm inputs is probably a bit more concentrated, some would argue is a bit more efficient, and we probably talk a little bit about kind of the pros and cons and efficiency subsequently. But here, I think it's who is the farmer's trusted advisor, and really getting that person, him or her, on board with the adoption of technology. And we've seen a variety of different models now that are enabling micro entrepreneurs people at the village levels, people at regional levels that really facilitate and create that interaction. So I guess if you're a tech company, you know, this word disruptive, you know, kind of gets talked a lot about. You know, how can we reduce the steps and the distribution of inputs or the collection of output? You know, how can we reduce the number of aggregators? There must be inherently some efficiency because we've got so many steps. But don't disregard the fact of, again, these trusted relationships. And actually, instead of thinking about solely making the farmers more production or efficiency, actually, how do we make, you know, some of the existing system more efficient by providing better information, or more knowledge sharing and transparency, more knowledge about weather sharing and forecasting, more knowledge about commodity pricing, more knowledge about supply and demand matching, you know, about financial underwriting. I think these are some of the fundamental underpinnings and lessons learned as we've invested globally and then also locally.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that's a very thoughtful way of thinking about. You know, I think in general we're caught up a lot in the world around disruption and disintermediation, but agriculture is like, you know, incremental improvements leading to systemic change, right? So it's not just about, you know, that one thing, but as you think about efficiency gains, you think about last mile. I like what the last mile. There are quite a few founders and startups in the room. So if you want to go to Temasek for a pitch, the first slide you put the last mile of agriculture. 10 years ago, it was like Alibaba and Tencent and all that. So I'm gonna take that, Ryan. I'm gonna take that, the last mile of agriculture, and then focus it. But I think the broader point is around that confluence and that ethos around, okay, you know, agriculture and food is, you know, you take on like 100 incremental improvements, and then over time you kind of bridge it together into small systems change. Come back to you, Kathy. I know ADB has, you know, had countless examples of very successful case studies that you work, you partner with people in the region. So bring back these themes around whether it's farmer adoption, whether it's around technology risk or de-risking and scalability. Could you perhaps share, you know, one or two really resounding case studies that really, you know, mattered to ADB?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, a lot of what we've talked about already is, you know, really resonating. And, you know, Ran, when you talked about, you know, risk mitigation, one of the pilots that we're doing at the moment with Louis Dreyfus and Ecom is developing some pilot insurance products for crop insurance in the region, because there's not much of that. And, you know, that's very classic risk mitigant, obviously. But it's also a way in which we can bring additional actors into this space who don't necessarily otherwise participate, and, you know, mobilize more private sector involvement, and, you know, so on and so forth. So, you know, on the more classic type of intervention from ADB, I'd like to actually come back to our technical assistance. So technical assistance is money that we provide alongside a classic investment. So we've given technical assistance, you know, for agroforestry in Indonesia, you know, and you know, irrigation and rainwater harvesting in Bhutan. But the one I'd like to focus in on is actually the work that we've been doing with Olam. So we've provided, I think it's about $300 million of loans to Olam. And alongside that, we have provided $3 million of technical assistance. So not very much money in comparative terms, but that's the beauty actually of technical assistance. Small amounts of money can be transformational. And those $3 million of technical assistance with Olam, what we've done, you know, collectively with that is work with farmers across it's Indonesia, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste, on a combination of things. So firstly, you know, agroforestry, you know, crop selection and interplanting and so on. But in Timor-Leste, we've done something a little bit different with the technical assistance. We have helped, you know, develop and pilot affordable biochar kilns. So, the prunings go into the biochar kiln, and then the resulting biochar gets, recirculated back. And we have also developed low-cost coffee milling facilities to help protect against, potential climate shock for the crop. Obviously, it's important that you gather the crop and then you process it quickly before some intervening climate event can come along and wipe out the result of all of that hard work. Those have been really successful interventions, and by doing those pilot initiatives using our technical assistance in those specific contexts, we've then been able to demonstrate the results of that back to the government in Timor-Leste, to then show the government that perhaps sovereign level intervention would be very helpful, and they're very receptive to that. So it's a sort of virtuous circle of what we as an organization can achieve, starting from that very low ticket size of private sector technical assistance intervention. So we're super proud of that, actually.
And technical assistance is something that it's close to our heart because we have teams in Taiwan of agronomists and scientists. And I was reading somewhere that the world needs less AI scientists and more soil scientists. No, seriously. Like the number one, and my good friend Anthony will talk about that a bit later, promoting ecogenomics. The amount of soil scientists and people who understand the soil microbiome in the world is extremely scarce. And it's going to get even more dangerous in 20 to 30 years. But to pick up on that point, Kathy, in terms of technical assistance and the incredible platform that ADB has, if you look back on the success of technical assistance, is it due to just providing around scarcity of talent, domain expertise, bridging the gap? What is the core underlying that source of technical assistance?
It's being able to provide very targeted intervention with high development impact. That's how we sort of see technical assistance. It drives development impact fairly exponentially in terms of, when you compare against the dollars deployed. So, we can convene true experts in, whatever the particular area is, who can go on the ground in the relevant place in our DMCs and deliver high value, high impact, ideally within a relatively short time frame as well. And it's proper hands-on intervention also. It's working with the farmers directly. And that's what we also sort of value about our technical assistance intervention. And it may be us intervening directly, or it may be us providing the funding to our corporate clients to intervene directly with the smallholder farmers in a true, skin in the ground. I love that phrase. I might have to steal that.
Yeah, because that also, I think, dials back to the theme that Ram mentioned around, the difficulty, but the importance of just incentivizing or inducing different types of farmer behavior. And to Ryan's point about the last mile. What's the tagline, Kathy? High value, low cost. Is it? The technical assistance is just that high value?
Yeah, high value, low cost, and high development impact.
Okay, so that's another startup idea. There are more than like 10 VCs in the room. So the first thing you take together, if you want to form like a new agri-food startup, you take the last mile from Temasek, you take the high value, high impact from Kathy, and bridge it together. But the broader point around technical assistance in the field, I think, is something that is really, really crucial. And the importance of it is that ultimately agriculture takes time. So unlike coding and software, anything which is related to pure software, the weeks and months it takes to run trials and manage weather and manage people and get things across really takes time. Let me circle back to Dirk, and then we'd love to open the floor to another 5-10 minutes of Q&A. And just picking up the point, Dirk, I mean, we spoke pre-panel a lot about the momentum and potential you see in this region. Rabobank is obviously as a global platform. You've got case studies and success stories across many parts of the world, particularly in Europe, in terms of sophistication. So from your point of view, if you look at this part of the region and using your words momentum, potential, what excites you the most? I mean, how do you really, what excites you the most? And there's such a big wealth of learnings you have from Europe and Rabo's global platform. What excites you about this region the most?
There are basically two things that really excite me and what I think will drive, the systemic change that is driven by these technological incremental steps. The first one is that we can, with the technology that we have, that the governance of supply chains are gonna change. I think the governance of supply chains are much more moving downstream than upstream, as we have been seeing in the last 100 years. So farmers are going to produce based on what consumers want or what legislation want consumers to spend upon. So this gives an incentive to inject value into the supply chain. And what excites me most is that difference of governance is going to redistribute that created value more evenly and fair across the supply chain. We don't have that monopolistic input industry and offtake in industry that you refer to in the US, for instance. In Europe, it's more or less the same, but it's called a cooperative. So then it's less aggressive, I would say. So that's one part that really excites me. And the second part, it has also to do with injecting value creation in the supply chain, and obviously also then the redistribution of that value creation, is the whole discussion around carbon and carbon credits. I do know that it's a long way from being a scientific way of homogeneous measurement and all these types of bottlenecks that we have to solve, but it will potentially inject value in the supply chain by providing a farmer a new revenue stream. And then, if I may, within Rabo, I think we do lots of things, but one of the most innovative ways, I think we try to organize the redistribution of that value created through consumer price premiums and carbon credits is a project that we call Acorn, where we partner with smallholders and supply chain stakeholders to unlock that value of specifically smallholders here in the region and elsewhere, but we focus now also on the region to provide these farmers the incentives to invest in all the technologies that you guys also invest in. So these are the two things. It's about value creation in the supply chain through difference in governance and through a new revenue stream, carbon, and fair distribution of it. Thank you.
And thank you, Dirk. I really appreciate that point, and you, in some ways, preempted the next panel, which is going to talk a bit more about carbon and climate, but that theme around agriculture as a source of value, and how do we think about linking the aspects, different aspects of decarbonization, carbon credits, de-risking, so on and so forth. And I definitely agree that in terms of from a more equitable economic development perspective, the idea of governance, we don't see monopolies here in Southeast Asia. You've got medium farmers, small farmers, and medium companies, but you don't have people who own 1,000 hectares or 2,000 hectares. So, building much more of a fair, equitable kind of value creation system between farmer, producer, distributor, brand, I think is a very, very important point, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
I would like to make one comment, because I intended to mention it. Farming at the end of the day sometimes seems to be like a race to the bottom. It's productivity improvement that is necessary. But that productivity improvement has been taken away by upstream or by downstream, and we need to stop that systemic, I think, error in the system. As you mentioned in your introduction, the food system is far too important to mess up with, so to say.
Great, thank you, Dirk. I'd like to open the, now the time to floor. We've got about 5-6 minutes. Any questions? Again, it's really the opening warm-up panel, so to speak, with our esteemed speakers around the themes of climate resiliency, smart farming, and really addressing an important start of the entire value chain at source as we think about crops, farmers, and then leading to all the conversion effects for agriculture and food. So maybe we can, we've got mics and speakers. Yes, sir. Thank you, gentlemen, for offering that brave first Q&A of the morning. Yeah. Kindly introduce yourself and also which organization you're from.
Sure.
And please pose the question. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Matt McDonald, working for a early stage startup called Farm, addressing smallholder productivity. My question is relating to, I guess, in a world where all farms are consolidating, North America, South America, Europe, everything's getting bigger. Open question, broad question to the panel. Why does the smallholder persist in Southeast Asia?
I don't know why the smallholder persists. It has to do with all the macro environment, I think, around it. But I tend to, argue that the smallholder is scaling up, not in the traditional way of buying more land and growing bigger and outperforming the neighbor, but I think the digital platforms that can aggregate smallholders into, these digital communities can catch up with some of the, physical consolidation advantages that we have seen in the West, without the potential environmental harm.
I think also to that question, it's a good question, and I'll probably just deepen it a bit more, is that the history of political and economy in Southeast Asia is that agriculture has always been a very big part of GDP over the last 50 years and 5 decades. So particularly, if agriculture is a big part of GDP, it's in the government's interest that they always had, encourage agriculture and farming. But on the farming level, you never really had monopolies. So even in Thailand, for example, you've got farmers who own big land, but that's maybe 50 hectares, 100 hectares. You don't have 1,000 hectares and so forth. So the smallholder farming is also a result of the fact that agriculture continues to grow as an important part of GDP and therefore somewhat decentralized. But the deeper point is that I think we are going to have a challenge in the next 10 years around labor. Here already, so we're already seeing it, around labor, productivity, so that that dramatic, incessant focus to drive productivity, improve yields, mechanization is very, very important. Because 10, 15 years from now, we probably will not have enough farmers. So we have to think about how do we move from smallholder farming to medium holding farming. Right?
Yeah, I guess to start off, we need to, I'm not saying that you're saying this, but smallholder farming isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, I think in many ways it's a good thing, particularly in the volatile time that we have right now, geopolitical, climate, et cetera. I think in some levels, smallholder farming can be more resilient. These people use a wider variety of techniques. They use a wider variety of crops. They're more distributed geographically than larger farms and more efficient and integrated farming systems. I mean, I think some people would argue, why do smallholder farmer exists? It's regulation around selling and transacting land. Perhaps there's no contract farming in certain places around the world. But I mean, fundamentally, it's still people. There is a talent pool, a large group of people that make this their livelihood. And when they look at the other economic opportunities, perhaps those don't really exist, or perhaps farming is just so cultural for them. So I think smallholder farming exists because of the people who do it. So I think that's the reason.
Great. One more question, sir?
So Stephen McDonald, I'm also with Matt, so I don't want to dominate the questions. If there's any others, I'll come back after that.
Any other questions from the floor? We have time for one more question before we wrap up this panel. Yes, sir. A gentleman at the back.
Hi, Fred Pucklehubs from Seagreen. We're a startup looking at a similar situation to the one just mentioned, but for coastal farmers. So I really just wanted to turn our attention just for a second to how the panel see the blue economy fitting into some of these questions, because we've talked a lot about smallholders, we've talked a lot about engagement with the last mile, and I think for the blue economy in particular, that's an incredibly important question, because at the moment, when we talk about any issues with agriculture, that effect is multiplied 10 times for the blue economy, for aquaculture. So I think it would be really interesting to hear whether any of the panelists have any reflections on how some of the startups here that are focusing on the blue economy, focusing on smallholder producers on the coasts and coastal resilience, can learn from the panelists today.
That's another 1 hour conversation, and my good friend Joan, who's coming on next panel, you're going to write that down to introduce the blue economy. But for this panel, any particular responses on the blue economy and how do you think about the maritime ocean part in regards to climate resiliency? Or probably just broader in general, right? Any thoughts on aquaculture or what Temasek is seeing as from a global umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, fish and seafood is a extremely important protein source in this region, and I think we would expect to see the demand for those products increase. And in terms of coastal region, obviously by definition, limited area for cultivation or supply. And so I think that there is a lot of opportunity to, responsibly and sustainably intensify aquaculture production. Again, using, better knowledge of genetics, better production systems, perhaps better inputs, this type of thing. We have one investment in Indonesia e-fishery that isn't as focused on the coastal region, but is focused on land-based aquaculture production from smallholders. And, they've been able to put together a variety of different solutions, improving the livelihood of farmers, providing access to credit, driving efficiency and driving sustainability. So the market opportunity is so big, there's a lot of opportunity for value creation that I'd say it's, a worthwhile and interesting and important cause overall.
Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, Ryan. And I mean, we've got an aquaculture investment in our private sector book. It's not an area we've done much in at this point, but I think we all have our particular challenges, right? That was quite an interesting conversation with our credit, let's put it that way. Talking to credit about essentially financing growing fish. That took some time.
I'm going to give a plug here because again, it's the whole point of this conference is building together a small ecosystem. I'm going to give a plug to my good friend Patrick. Patrick, raise your hand from FT. Patrick knows quite a bit about aquaculture. So for those in the room during the coffee break, come and grab the gentleman. But really, we want to curate these conversations, and I do appreciate the question. I think it's a good question that we think a lot about land, we think a lot about trees, we think a lot about crops, but interweaving that, we plan to ponder around agri-food systems, coast, marine, swamps are very important. So thank you very much for the question, and we'd like to invite you to be a panel moderator next year on the blue economy. Yeah, we got that down, right? Yeah. Joan, you're going to do that. And now, just like wrap up, maybe just like 30 seconds. It's a bit of a surprise, but I'd like to do this as moderator privileges. 30 seconds from each of our speakers. When we take a step back and kind of like blue sky and think about climate resiliency, climate smart farming, what do you hope to see in 30 seconds in 10 years? Blue sky question.
Fully digital, smallholder food production value chains.
Embedded in fair ways in the supply chain.
Significant digital adoption at the smallholder level that gives access to them, solutions access to them.
I don't think I have any additional ideas to that, but I love all of them. And what I'm also looking forward to in 10 years' time is being at SEA 2033, right?
So fully fair, fully digital value creation. So I really appreciate it. And I would like to just sum up, I think, beyond the business of agri-food and the disruption and the innovation is the ethos around fairness, inclusion, equity. And I thought it was very important for the note that, as we think about our different jobs, and part of the whole ethos for SEA is not to be a private sector. We got people from private sector, public sector, researchers, VCs. and that underlying ethos around how do we build things which are fairer, which are more digital, which are more innovative, but ultimately create in the long term. So that for the opening panel, please join me to give a warm round of applause and thank you for a fantastic opening panel, and look to see you later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renhu, and to all our expert speakers there for that really interesting conversation. I think we could have gone on and on. But next, we're going to focus on carbon farming and developing carbon markets for the agri-food sector. I'm delighted to welcome our speakers, Ryan Zhui of AgFood Future, Ingrid van Ginkel of Husk, and Deepak Roy Morthy of McKinsey & Co. And moderating this session, we have John Fowl of Atlas Capital.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This was a very good first step into the topic. And I'm honored today to be with awesome people, and we're going to talk about this incredible topic, which is really on point after the past panel, which is carbon trading, right? And specifically with the eyes inside the agri-tech sector. So a bit of introduction. I'm John Fall, general partner of Atlas Capital. We're one of the first climate tech funds in Southeast Asia. With our first fund, a very small one, we've done 14 investments, mainly in the US. And I just came back, in fact, from California, where I've got a news. We got our anchor investor. And because we are aiming to bridge Southeast Asia with US and Europe to bring technologies in climate tech faster, this is very meaningful for us. And in fact, on that topic of carbon markets, we have a few startups in our portfolio, carbon capture startup, also climate adaptation through carbon credit trading. And we're really excited to be hosting this panel on such a big topic, right? Specifically today, where I think the emission trading system averaged 25% of the world global GHG emission, right? And I think this is a market that is steadily growing towards $100 billion, I think, last year. So really hot topic. And without further ado, I would like to let our speakers to introduce themselves. So maybe if you want to start, Ryan.
All right. I'd like to share a little bit of my journey into this. You know, in this battle to avoid a catastrophic climate change, you know, my discovery journey has been, you know, not a linear one. It has zigzagged through time and disciplines. You know, my career started 20 years ago in the energy transition, so in the renewable sector. So I have seen crazy, you know, valuation of a small time wind farm operator, you know, surpass the big oil gas company. And I also witnessed the fall of CDM, you know, in the Chicago exchange. So, you know, the EV and the PV is getting cheaper and cheaper now. You know, we're pretty much seeing all the line cross. You know, we swore 10 years ago, you know, we're going to cross. So throughout the years, you know, I had this privilege of traveling around the world, you know, seeing for myself, you know, how this industrialization of agriculture actually has done to our environment, animal welfare, as well as our health. So it just came to my realization that, you know, everything I care about is actually was going to devastated by this thing. So, but now to think about it, I mean, this huge, vast, this, you know, footprint from agriculture and the food supply chain, you know, this created this, I say, massive barrier and also huge opportunity. You know, if we're really going to see some level of a, you know, kind of a food system transformation in the same way we've seen in the energy sector, you know, essentially what we need to do is to build this ecosystem as well as looking for the, you know, equivalent of a solar panel, you know, PVs, to fuse the regenerative agro farming as well as a reduction in animal products, right? So I started looking into it, and then I realized actually the solutions are out there. They're getting cheaper, and it's just a no-brainer for me. You know, let's just do it, and then we can worry about everything else that obviously wrong with the world today, right? But at least by then we'll have some time to do it. So right around 2017, I started one of the first organizations in China to promote alternate protein, China Plant-Based Food Alliance. Start to building the infrastructure and the ecosystem to actually close the gap between knowledge, information, funding, partnership, as well as some regulatory issues as well to accelerate this protein transition. So a couple of years later, this ecosystem turned into something even bigger, Agri for the Future. So we're working on the more broader kind of sustainable agriculture side of things. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, so building an ecosystem is really much what we're trying to do here, right? So thanks to bring it back. So Ingrid, what about you? What was your journey into that agri-tech space and specifically on the carbon? How did you get there?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the invitation that that I can be here. So I'm Ingrid and I'm working for Husk Ventures, and Husk is an impact-driven company that is accelerating the transition to agricultural or regenerative agricultural. And we do it by offering carbon-based solutions. And so what we do is we take low-value agricultural waste product, rice husk, and we turn it into biochar. And we already heard about biochar in the last panel. And biochar is one of the top 5 carbon removal solutions currently existing. But biochar is also an amazing product for regenerative agriculture. And so we get carbon credits for our biochar, which I can elaborate on a little bit later. And we use this money that comes from the carbon credits, we use it to lower the price of our carbon fertilizers and our carbon biostimulators for the farmers. And by doing so, we are building soil, sinking carbon, and improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers by increasing yields on the one side and lowering input costs on the other side.
Increasing the farmers' productivity, yield, and making them extra revenue streams. Incredible. So what about you, Deepak? We'd love to hear your story on how did you get into that sector?
Thanks. So my journey into agriculture, I think I was born on a farm. So always been involved in agriculture. Indeed. And about 10 years ago, I was looking at the sector and thinking, how could we potentially help improve the farmers a bit better, and thinking of the valuable problems to solve. And from a spend perspective, it was actually from the agrochemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides and all those type of things. And it was quite inefficient in the system because they were spending so much of money on chemicals, but not really getting the benefit. And when we investigated this a bit further, what we found was the weather had the highest correlation towards improving the let's say, fertilizer efficiency. So currently, fertilizer only has about 30% uptake by plants, and the rest of it actually leaches into the environment, which causes quite of environmental damage. So we started looking at weather analytics as a way to reduce chemical inputs into let's say, farms. And by doing that, I think the benefit that we realized from that would have been reduction in emissions from the farms. Unfortunately, what we also learned is we went by a valuable problem to solve versus what the farmer actually values. And we can talk about that a bit later because that's one of the questions. Yeah. But that was the introduction to this, and then taking those lessons, we're looking at it from other sectors, predominantly palm oil, which has a very bad image, rightfully or wrongfully. But we've learned on how that practices can be adopted in palm oil, and how there's 2 million over smallholder farmers in Indonesia, Malaysia for palm oil. and what regenerative agriculture practices look like for them. And that was more based on doing more with the waste that exists on the farms and translating that into things that can help them while reducing their cost. So that was roughly the journey, and over the last 12 to 14 months, I've been focusing more on doing more with the waste on farm.
Such a big topic, and we're going to circle back to this. But so, Ryan, if I may, we're talking about a market that is, a lot different aspect of it, right? So carbon trading, it's really massive, right? Talk about climb walks, direct air capture, planting trees. Talk about blue ocean maybe in a little while. But what about the adaptation of that for the agri-tech space? What do you see as a trend? What's the size of the market for specifically agri-tech?
I think we will got the numbers, different numbers. Agri-food supply chain actually contribute somewhere, everyone says different numbers, around 30%, right? 35, 34% of emissions, right? And also I think that's a huge opportunity. Also, there's this massive problem, right? But talk about, we already have this carbon market, and we hear about a lot about, ecosystem service programs, right? These are actually very wonderful things happening. But the thing is, most of them, it's not working for us, agri-food sector, right? And I think they exist, they're really good at creating these incentives to actually, for behavior changes, like reward farmers, to help companies, corporates to meet their climate commitments, right? But the thing is, the reason why it's not working, shockingly, is we hasn't actually set up the standard and the rules yet, right? So that's why we cannot freely trade this. This is a huge opportunity, but the thing is, where are the rules, right? So I think for this to work for favor for all of us sitting here, it's just we need entire measuring and reporting system need to rebuilt, right? And I think we need more private sector to involve in this sector, in this area. This is no longer academic exercise anymore, And this is something that's going to have a real financial consequences for farmers, for companies, for investors. So I think this is a really carbon market is a huge market. But actually, can I take a moment? Actually, everyone's quite really quiet in the morning, right? I mean, I want since the whole supply chain is here, right? I want to ask a quick question. Actually, so how many of you guys actually know the emission intensity of your business? Can you raise your hand if you know the number? 1, 2, wow. So 3, all right. So this is the brings the range. This is the kind of question you're gonna get really familiar with it, because you're gonna get asked a lot from now on. No matter you're a grower, you're a processor, you're a trader, you're a retailer, you're investor, right? Even banks. So I think I want to shed some light on this. So as food business in general, right? The indirect emission, actually the one from scope 3, the one occurs up and down value chain. Those ones actually accounts for 90% of all of our emission, right? For most of us. So, and it is really different, unlike other industries, right? For all of us sitting here today, right? We really need to work on that. There's no shortcut, right? We cannot avoid a scope 3, period, right? So I think in terms of carbon farming, that carbon we sequestrated from the land is actually perfect at balancing things out in your own supply chain. Start from there, right? So I think this is very important, and I want to share with all of you guys. This is something I always share with the people. I cannot emphasize enough. For agri-food business, there's no shortcut. This is imperative. It's not voluntary. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to remind us that we're going to have to pay taxes. I think, in case we forgot. But guess what? Actually, we don't have to yet in some countries, right? So, but brace yourself. So maybe, Deepak, since we're talking about these policies and what didn't work, but also what works, maybe can you share with us some of the things that you've observed actually working out for the farmers in that space to embed those carbon credit systems with what they are doing and hopefully make the whole thing a bit more efficient.
Yep. So we've been looking at this space for I think, close to 12, 14 months, quite closely. And it's more about driving that behavioral change, which was covered in the earlier panel. And it's almost at the risk of sounding repetitive. It's two big things that we see. The first one is making it worthwhile the farmer's time, right? So if we make it worthwhile their time in the short term, then it becomes a lot easier to work with them over the longer term because you build that trust. And what we mean by making it worthwhile their time in the short term is, again, going back to solving their problem first before trying to get them to try new things. So it's finding things that you can embed into their current practices rather than requiring them to make transformative efforts at the start. Because the biggest problem around this is getting started. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is around making things accessible for the farmers. And there's a couple of things that we've seen work well here and a couple of things that don't work well. So we've seen tractor companies, for example, giving tractors with 0% down payment. And like 100 farmers went and bought 100 tractors, right? And we know the default rate is going to be high there. So that's not sustainable. But it gets them into a motion of thinking, how do we use and adopt these new practices? And I think they get that the practices.
Any good example?
Yeah, but the good example on what works is when you work with each of the farming communities in a very small district or small cluster has one or two key farmers that they look to and respect. And if you work with them to set up a new program and get them to try it first and show the results, then farmers really tend to adopt it. And we are seeing this, interestingly, that farmers go from the seeing is believing methodology, right? So we're seeing that take traction, and we're also seeing farmers get more active on social media. So we've interviewed a whole bunch of farmers recently and found that, farmers are starting to learn how to farm better through YouTube videos, TikTok videos, and starting to buy their produce, or sorry, not produce, but the inputs through things like Lazada, Shopee. So these are all transformative changes that are happening, right? And when you combine all of that with first making it worthwhile their time, and second one, getting them or showing them that something really works, that's when you really can expect transformative change to happen. But again, it's a journey.
Any governmental incentives you've seen being deployed that have actually moved the needle?
Look, in terms of incentives from a government perspective, what we've seen work was, and this happened in India actually, so it was set up of what was called a farmer-producer organization or a cooperative. And that allowed farmers to aggregate and come together and then have economies of scale when they sell their produce. So it's more towards their output, not so much so on the carbon credit yet. But that was one that really worked well and has generated a lot of impact for farming communities.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about biochar, if you let us, Ingrid. So of course this is a big topic. We're talking about this, half an hour ago in the other panel. So how do you monitor and measure the actual evolution of the soil with the biochar, and how do you track that on a carbon effectiveness, right? Because we talk a lot about this, but how does that work, really?
So to start, I have to say that there's a difference between the carbon credits that we get for the biochar and the soil carbon credits. So we get carbon credits for the biochar, and we get a very good price for that because we don't have the risk that is related to forestry carbon credits. For us having biochar, you actually have fixed carbon in your hand, and therefore it is a real carbon removal credit that you have, and that that gives us a very good price that we can reinvest in our company. Then there's this other aspects that if you put the biochar into the ground and we mix it up and we are adding nutrients to it, if you then put it into the ground, the soil is regenerated and it has a better holding capacity of CO2, right? But it's not only with biochar, it's also with other regenerative practices like covering crops, not plowing, and things like that. And on the soil carbon credits, we are actually in a piloting phase. And so we're currently piloting in Cambodia, where we work together with an AI company and satellite imagery, and also soil testing. And so there's a lot of soil testing involved in here for the computer learning to do everything. And it's not only with the farmers that apply biochar, but this can also be just with farmers that are applying other regenerative agricultural practices as well. However, having said that, the carbon credits from the biochar, it's said and done. We were the first biochar company outside the US and the EU to get certified carbon removal units for that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And like we did pioneering on this in 2019, we're currently pioneering on the soil carbon credits for our farmers as well. So having said it as well, I just want to elaborate a little bit on my co-panelists, saying that Scope 3, very important. We're currently partnering with different partners to reduce Scope 3 emissions. It's a very hot topic for many. And also going more into the detail of systems that are actually in place. I think my brother is a farmer in the Netherlands, and he would love to have soil carbon credits, but it's not there yet. So like anywhere in the world, this is a new topic, and it's a big chance, but I think everywhere it's still in the piloting phase.
Yeah, I mean, regulation is of course, something that will take time. But if I may follow up on this, because it's a very interesting topic for me. I just came back from New York, where I was attending Carbon Unbound, which was supposed to be the largest carbon capture conference in the world, and it was just 200 people. So if we look at carbon trading, and specifically with biochar, how viable is this solution to get at scale, right? Because my understanding today is the total carbon capture that is actually verified is less than 4,000 tons per year right now. So, and I think, we need a lot more of that. So if we take the example of biochar specifically, at large scale, how much can we imagine being actually captured from that solution?
It is a scalable solution. It is recognized by the EPCC as a top 5 scalable solution to remove carbon from the air. The technique right now is quite expensive. That's why we need the carbon credits to make the products that we make affordable for the farmers. But as any technology, this price will come down. And then it is, I cannot say a number on this, I'm sorry for that, but it is definitely something that has future. Yeah.
Wonderful, and I can only insist about the fact that this market is at its very, very beginning, right? And we're probably going to see a lot more money going into the sector, as every company is in that room going to have somehow to, again, adapt and pay taxes if they don't adapt, right? So as a follow-up on that, for maybe the people in the room who have carbon intense businesses, what are the opportunities that you've seen being successful partnerships between the political, the policies, and the private sector to achieve that scale in the carbon markets, Ryan?
I think in the past few years, there are good things happened and exciting things happening, right? And one of the most exciting area to look at is actually the development of ecosystem. It's kind of agri-food focused mitigation ecosystem services. They are coming out of a different continent, different region, right? And then I think it's really good development. They're gradually building up this demand and also supporting funding and then valuable time for a lot of innovations such as Husk, right? And I think for most of the companies, I think it's It's a lot easier, no matter your grower, your big startup, your corporation. You can always just leverage on one of those region programs to sign up to it. There are so many exciting partnerships I've seen. Big corporations partner up with a startup company like Husk, right? They're working on reducing on scope 3, starting from there, and then also in the meantime, the farmers, the growers actually directly benefit from that. I mean, in terms of economic incentives, right? So I think there's a regional programs you can sign up to. I'm not familiar with the ones in Thailand, but I'm sure there's a lot of this sort of similar program in Southeast Asia. Much of our conversation actually been focused on the carbon removal, right? I would like to see more transparency happening in carbon avoidance. So I think this is one of the areas that could benefit agri-food a lot, right? Could bring, actually, if you put a price on something, people start making rational decisions, right? So let's hope, in the next 3 to 5 years, all the companies, the more private sector is going to involve in this sector, in this area. And then certainly I hope to see more agri-food companies actually sign up to this.
It's also a bottleneck. I think let's address the elephant in the room here, is the regulators and the verification systems, right? So the elephant, of course, we all heard about Vera, right, this scandal, and I think that's really slowed down the market growth, right? If you look at the chart, it was really like this, and last year really dropped, I think 70% of the tradings because of that Vera situation. And there's a few other issues with just planting trees. Forest can burn, right? So that's where biochar start to be more interesting. That's where maybe the blue economy start to be a little bit more interesting. And I'm a big believer, I think Renhua mentioned, into using seaweed for carbon capture, because that's really a place where the seaweed cannot burn, in the ocean, contrary to the trees. Any other technologies that you guys are bullish on in that specific, agri space for carbon? So biochar is one. Is there other key technologies that top 5,
Can I add a little bit more on the partnerships, maybe,
Yeah.
if that just briefly, because I think partnerships here in the carbon market are very important. We are working together. For example, here in Thailand, we're doing trials with Taiwan, which are going very well. I think partnerships with larger corporations that have the connection with the farmers is actually great, because larger corporation has connection in we talked about the last mile, in the first mile, right? And so a big problem for carbon markets to reach smallholder farmers is that they don't know the farmers, they're very small scale, it requires volume, but off-takers often already have this established, and so you have the bank account of the farmers, you know how long they have been farming over there, you know how trustworthy they are on their regenerative practices, because you have the certifications, etc. And therefore, partnerships on those things are very important to us, because we can cover in that sense that first mile. And so also in Cambodia, we are working together and partnering with Amru Rice on capturing this and really enabling us to reach the farmer at farmer level on the carbon credit market.
Creating that ecosystem again, right? So yeah, going back to the technologies.
In terms of technologies that we're seeing maybe from the carbon avoidance perspective, one of the technologies that we think will start making a difference is the feed for animals. Some companies has two schools of thought on this. One is going down the insect protein with a fortified
We got a
view.
friend here in the room doing that, Nicolas.
Great. And the second one is, it's quite interesting. So a couple of startups in the UK are converting carbon to animal feed and starting to scale that up. So those would be the type of interesting new type of technologies, I think, that will start moving the needle in terms of carbon avoidance.
Can I add a point to that? Much of the conversation actually technology be focused on regenerative agriculture. How we monitoring the soil, right, and then make it more transparent. How can we measure it? right? But let's don't forget, and there's also like biotechnology, biotech. We working with the companies like, they're working on improving the soil carbon holding capacity, right? Those kind of technology are actually they're coming out, and then they're working with. They already set up this partnership with the bigger corporations. They get the funding, they get the time to do it, to develop their technology. And also, let's don't forget it. Alternative protein is a new aspect. Actually, brings brand new horizon to this carbon avoidance. To a lot of meat companies, it's just it's actually easier to combine the alternative protein into this. So technology like plant-based dairy and meat alternatives and fermentation as well as cell ag as well. So I think these are more very exciting to watch. Yeah.
Plant-based as well is not to leave behind. So we don't have much time, but I like to get something to the room, right? So I always like when I moderate panels to give them one thing they can take away. So if we could have each of us an insight, a number that they could take away on that very specific topic of carbon trading market for agriculture, what would it be? So anyone wants to start?
Can I start then?
One number, one takeaway.
All right, one takeaway. We can't predict the future, but we can certainly learn from the past or other industry, renewable energy sector, right? So I predict in 5-10 years out, the carbon credit is going to be, the value and the demand for carbon credits is going to go up, right, very quickly. And especially the quality ones from quality carbon credit, investment in quality carbon credits in regenerative agriculture, alternative protein. These are going to be the ultimate, I'm not going to say ultimate, the most efficient, one of the efficient way to help all of us, from agri-food sector to achieving, both financial objectives as well as, economic, commitment to environment as well as society.
Ingrid?
Yes, although the carbon market looks a little bit cowboyish and is definitely not grown yet, I think it is time for everybody to hop on that train because it's going to be booming, and especially with all the regulations coming up, you really...
Sounds like Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, but then it's slightly different for a better world. So yeah, that would be my advice. Hop on the train and get to know about the carbon markets because it's going to be big. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I think the supply base is what's interesting about Southeast Asia. And when we look at the sheer number of farmers, which is close to 100 million in Southeast Asia, that gives you a scale of what you can potentially achieve from carbon farming, as well as the land bank. The question that everybody should maybe be pondering is how do we do it quickly and at scale?
So I think on my side, I would like to get people to remember that carbon cycle is just one of the important cycles, right? If you look at the planetary boundary framework, there is also the phosphorus cycle, there's the biodiversity, and we can imagine that towards 2050, we will also have those credit system or tokens allocated not just for carbon trading, but maybe for the phosphorus cycle as well, maybe for the diversity. And these are things that don't exist yet, but are so important. I think I like to come back to what Reinho has said. We need more AI scientists than more soil scientists than AI scientists. Sorry. So it's really that, right? Without the biodiversity, we can't do anything, right? So keeping that in mind, I want to thank you for this panel, and I think we've learned a couple of things. We've learned that this market is going to go to the roof, to the moon, maybe, bigger than Bitcoin. Actually, if you look on Google and you type McKinsey data on that market, it's going to be really big, bigger than Bitcoin. I don't know, but it's forecasted to be very big. And we've learned that there is a couple of solutions that exist, some that are undermined, like biochar, for example, but also avoidance and plant-based meats and all these new dairies as well. So this is a very exciting market. If you have any questions, please come to reach out to our panelists, and let's build that ecosystem together around that carbon credit in agri-tech for Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John, and all our panelists there. It was so interesting. Again, we could have gone on and on. But now it's time to stretch your legs and grab a coffee, say hi to your friends and colleagues. It's time for the coffee break. Please do come back in 20 minutes because we've got more exciting sessions ahead of us. So back in here at 11:15.
gentlemen, we're about to get started. Please kindly be seated. And welcome back to the next session. We're going to be talking about innovating for soil health and the growing solution for the global food solution. Joining the panel will be Dr. Nirmon from Taiwan, Renuka from Bioprime, Anthony from Eagle Genomics, and moderating the panel will be Erin Sweeney from Grow Asia. Please welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. I can see people still coming in from the door. I'll encourage folks in the back to find your seat because this is going to be a fascinating panel. Not to be missed, not a moment of it. So I'll let folks take just 30 more seconds to join us before I introduce you to the absolutely fantastic panel who's here to really help us demystify, I think, one of the biggest topics that I've been hearing about in agriculture lately. I'm going to quote a few numbers that Renhua already shared with you this morning, just to remind us of the scope of the challenge that we're currently facing in the agri-food system. So we know that there's going to be 9 billion people on Earth by 2050. We're going to have to increase agricultural production by 60% to feed those people. But we also know that about 1/3 of the soil that's available to produce our food is already degraded. So it's a very concerning situation that we find ourselves in. And so in the last few years, I, as someone that's been in this space for about 13 years, continue to hear things about, well, we need to now focus on soil health. We need to focus on regenerative practices and regenerative agriculture. I work for a multi-stakeholder platform called Grow Asia as the director of programs. And honestly, these words keep coming up in every single one of our conversations. But I'll be honest with you and say that I am a layperson, and I think many of those of you in the audience are lay people on this topic as well. So I'm thrilled to be joined on the stage today by 3 experts, all having finished terminal degrees, and they've promised to help demystify this topic for all of us here today in the next 25 minutes. So please get your questions ready for them. I'll make sure we leave some time at the end as well. And thank you so much to the 3 of you for joining us today and helping us, again, to really understand what is it about soil health that we all need to know moving forward. Renuka, I'd love to start with you. You agreed kindly in our pre-panel discussion to actually kick us off. So what does soil health actually mean? And what's the difference between soil health and regenerative agriculture?
Thank you, first of all, to have us here. Lovely set of gathering, very high in energy, so really looking forward as the day progresses as well. Very tough question, the difference between soil health and regenerative agriculture. So let's look at it as simply as we can. Soil health essentially started with first people thinking that soil is an inert material, just probably there to act as a structure to help our crops stand and grow. And then we moved towards understanding a little bit of more physical attributes of soil. So understanding a little bit more about water holding capacity, and moved on to understand a little bit about the chemical nature of the soil, and have fixated around the physical and the chemical nature of the soil for almost most of our agriculture, lifetime as human beings on this earth. And now we're coming to understand that probably the biological aspect of the soil is perhaps the most important one. And the problem here is we know so little about it, let alone understand the microbes that live in the soil. let alone understand the diversity across different regions, different climatic conditions, different crops. And now we are thinking about how does this interaction between the soil, the physical aspects, the chemical aspects, the microbiome, throwing in a word now here, interacts with the plants to give us more sustainable ways to grow our food. And that brings us to regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture basically focuses on how can we farm or grow crops or grazing lands better to ensure that the soil is restored in its capacity for not just the chemical, physical, but also the biological aspect of it. So now we're focusing more on the biological aspect and moving forward from just the focus on the physical and the chemical aspect. And the difference between soil health and regenerative agriculture is basically now we're looking towards the future and asking ourselves how do we make sure that the soil has a buffering capacity for more resilient agriculture systems while facing climate change, while facing challenges in nutrient availability, nutrient cycling, and essentially to get to a place where we have better crops that are more enriched in nutrients. We've been hearing about food security and not really focusing on the nutritional security. Our food today is not as nutritious as what our grandparents ate. And something that I think Anthony will talk in more detail is the link between what we eat to the link between the microbiomes that live in our system. How does that get to a more holistic living for us as well? So I think that basically defines today where we are at in terms of soil and regenerative agriculture.
Excellent. Thank you so much. In a few moments, I'll come back to you and ask you how your company, BioPrime, is helping us to really dig into the solutions and innovations to improve soil health. Dr. Nurman, I'd love to turn to you and ask you to tell us a little bit more about the next big question that always comes to my mind when I'm thinking about soil health, which is how can we actually support the small-scale farmers that we were talking about earlier this morning on the panels? How can we actually support those farmers to improve their soil health and then to increase their yields? And what is Taiwan doing to support that?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to share that I totally agree with Dr. Renuka. The healthy soil is from the healthy biology of soil and the diversity. We need to restore those friendly microbes back to soil. So that is the very important part. At Taiwan, because we, especially our cassava starch industry, most of the farmers are smallholder farmers, and we cannot let them work alone because I would say quality supply route to factory are very important. Not only quantity, but also the starch content and the consistent supply. So based on the belief on the soil biology rich, so we decide that we have an agronomy team to work closely with them. We test the soil. And we found that the cassava land in the northeastern region, which is a majority root supply area, the organic matter content is far below the productive range, less than 1%. So our task first is to add it back. So what is the best organic matter that we can find? Because organic matters give not only nutrients to food, but also to microorganisms in soil. And also, it improves the water holding capacity and the soil structure. So the answer to us is compost. Okay? We all know that vermicompost is the best, but it's too limited and too expensive. So what we do is we make the compost from our factory biomass. We work with university, trying to find friendly microbe that can be boosting, add into our compost to boost the plant performance. So by those, we can have the compost ready for our farmers. They can drop unloading the root at our root yard and pick up all those back to their farm. Our next project is we hope that we can further lower their costs because our biomass also limited, right? So what we are trying to do is trying to expand the portfolio of the mixed culture that we have so they can handle compost at their farm, self-made, low cost, and using the crop residue.
Excellent. So really empowering farmers through the technologies that your team at Taiwan is providing to be able to improve their soil health with fairly simple kind of recycling of nutrients. So Anthony, I'd love for you to come in here and tell us a little bit more about how we can feed these kinds of biological inputs into systems of agricultural production and some of the work that you're doing with Eagle Genomics.
Thanks, Erin. Well, first of all, I just have to call out Taiwan for your inspirational leadership on catalyzing this community to drive the future of agri-food. And I was quite expecting Renoir this morning to talk about his vision for the 100-year transformation of our food systems, which
might still be coming.
Good, exactly, might still be coming. So I think, look, genomic technology is a technology that's existed for 20 years, and mechanisms to understand transcriptomics and proteomics, multiomics, metabolomics, etc. These are very new technologies. But what happens in the technology revolution is you build a machine, the machine generates an output, and then you try and backward engineer a hypothesis related to the output the machine delivers. So we've been living in the first phase of the revolution, which is enabling us to classify organisms in various environments. I say various environments because I think one metaphor for the audience, stretched metaphor perhaps, but I think it's very useful, is that our forebears, when they lifted their mouths from the ground, the gut microbiome that they carried with them was the soil that they carried with them. And you can extend the metaphor the other way to say that the soil is the external gut of the plant. So we're, as a species, as humans, we look at objects and we try and understand objects, but we need to think about process. We need to think about metabolism. So what is soil doing? It's metabolizing inputs and transforming them into available capital for macroorganisms living in the soil. When we think about biodiversity, we think about macroorganisms. By macroorganism, I mean things we can see. And we ignore the things we can't see. And to the extent we start to talk about them, we're saying, which probiotics are good for me in my diet, and how can I get them? Or which microbes fix nitrogen at the plant root? And the technology is evolving now so that we can start to move, when we characterize biodiversity, start to look at the biodiversity of the invisible fundament of life on Earth. And we can look at biodiversity by characterizing it as genes, species, function. And function requires us to understand a host that the microbiome is interacting with to deliver that function. And then ecosystem, because they're ecologies of organisms interoperating to metabolize together. And then evolution, because microbiomes are evolving. Evolutionary time for a microbiome is some of these organisms replicating slowly over years, some of them replicating 10, 20, 30 times in a 24-hour cycle. So we start to understand the organism as a holobiont as well as the host or the macroorganism interacting with an ecology of microorganisms. And the technology is evolving for us to start to understand that interaction. The inputs, the biomass inputs are available to the ecology to transform, to metabolize, to deliver to the host organism a natural capital contribution. unless the inputs are not available, or unless the ecology of microorganisms is compromised such that, redundant and resilient though it is, it's no longer capable of delivering the outputs necessary for the host organism to subsist healthily. So we are at the dawn of a new age, and I'm sort of feeling a bit of a fraud because Renoir, when he called us out this morning at Eagle Genomics, said, we're focused on soil science and not AI, but actually this is an AI challenge. How to understand the interaction of ecologies of microorganisms interacting with host organisms. It's the dawn of the new age across the entire spectrum of what we call one future health. So health of the animal interacting with the microbiome, human interacting with the microbiome, the plant interacting with the microbiome. We will understand signal from all these domains that will help us in the others advance the science and the art.
Excellent, thank you. Can I just see by a show of hands how folks are doing so far with following our incredible discussion on soil health and regen ag? Getting the terminology starting to make sense. Thank you, Anthony, for making the connection to our own bodies. It usually helps when we can make that association as well to the gut microbiome. And I think that's a fantastic metaphor for us to think about when we're looking at soil regeneration and really trying to avoid the degradation that we've been seeing. Renuka, could you talk to us a little bit more about as Anthony just alluded to, that we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years on this topic of soil health and the biological inputs that we're developing to improve soil health. Tell us a little bit more about what BioPrime is doing and how you've seen the landscape shifting over the last 10 years.
A lot of fundamental shift is, happening, I would say, not even happened, but happening. We've evolved from looking at plants as a single unit of survival, which means an organism in itself, and entire of our varietal development programs, GMOs, traditional breeding approaches, agronomy, have always focused on plant as a single unit. And that's probably one of the reasons why we have evolved into a system which is threatening our very existence. And now we're shifting and understanding that it's not plant as a single unit, but it is the plant with the microorganisms that live on it, within it, and in the roots around it. That means the whole set of probably millions of genomes together that's evolving and contributing towards the adaptive and the defensive response of the plants. And so our entire approach towards development of newer varieties, development of nutrients, development of biologicals has seen a radical change. And gone are the days when you would say, if your soil lacks nitrogen, here just takes a bag of nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen, and put it into the soil and be done with it. Now we fundamentally have to look at, is the nitrogen lacking because there aren't microorganisms that are helping the plants get it? Or to a system where do disease and pest tolerance, does it require insecticides, pesticides, or does it require microorganisms in the soil or within the plant to give them that character? And that is exactly what we're doing at BioPrime. So we've been looking at climate change since 2016, which was one of the worst years in India. It is similar to this year. El Nino was predicted. We had 155 years, worst heat waves, 5 of them decimating crops in a region where we come from. And as we looked into this system more deeply, we understood that climate change impacts plant processes. And the fundamental processes that are responsible for taking the nutrients, making food, function at an efficiency of as little as 30%. And so no amount of extra fertilizers, hormones that we add to the soil are going to give us the productivity that we desire. And so if these systems are flawed, then what is working? So if we look at heirloom varieties, if we look at age-old traditional varieties, these varieties had a much better defensive and adaptive system. So somewhere plants have compromised. Compromise may be a bad word here. Maybe there was a trade-off where we pushed systems to give higher yields, but compromised on the defensive and adaptive response. So here at Bioprime, what we do is find trigger molecules that can restore or help the plant remember its old ways of defending itself better. And so that's the biomolecule part, but that's just half the story because we need microbes to do the other half of the story. And so we're building plant-associated microbe library or a microbiome library to fundamentally understand how different sets of microbiomes in different environments help crops mitigate climate change, heat tolerance. Can we work at 50% less fertilizers? Today morning only we were discussing that the fertilizer use efficiency is just about 30%. So 70% of what we are adding is just ending up as being pollutant. And so can we fix the systems in a more holistic way? And these are the two approaches that we're taking towards designing biologicals at Bioprime.
Thank you so much, and for really highlighting the work that innovation and innovators like yourself can do to help to bring that soil health back to a different level or an ancient level. Maybe the plants sort of remember what they used to know how to do, and to also help us hit environmental
So I
targets.
think if we have to just like sum it in a couple of words, I would say the idea is to look at plant as a community rather than plant as an individual. And that's where it begins for us.
Excellent. Take that as a key takeaway from today, folks. Dr. Nuriman, can I turn back to you? Because, you know, I'm thinking as we talk about this incredible innovations that are available to improve soil health, we also have to think about the end users. So back to the smallholder farmers and rural businesses that all of us are working with in some way. Dr. Nuriman, how can we help to make these kinds of innovations and the opportunity to improve soil health more accessible and affordable to farmers? And what's Taiwan doing to improve that?
I think for Taiwan, we luckily that we work with TTDI. We have a land for agriculture station, which is about 230, 250 hectares. And this is a sandbox for us to try many new things. Not only the compost, the mixed culture that we add into the compost to see the impact on plants' performance. We also try many farming practices like rotation crop, cover crop, and mulching, like the biodegradable mulch film. And we follow the changes of the plant performance and also the soil biology. And that is the way to show the farmer. We have to test it first, and we show them so that they are willing to adopt it. We also try to work with them at their farm. So I think they are willing to try, but they cannot trade with cost, but we will help them on yield. So that is the way to help them in terms of their costs.
Excellent, thank you. So we're saying that even though the costs might be going up just a bit, that we do expect to see significant yield increase for farmers. And I think we don't have time for this, but I would encourage anyone who's curious to learn more to come up to Dr. Nuriman over lunch and ask a little bit more about how you're doing that with farmers. Anthony, I'd like you to kick us off with a barrier question, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. So if you have any burning questions, get them ready. Anthony, what are some of the barriers to adoption that you're seeing from the technology that Eagle Genomics has developed?
Well, we are working with large enterprises with distributed R&D teams trying to innovate on product to solve for some of the challenges. So we're networking their data, networking external data from research establishments and generating signal from those data using our system that can help them substantiate claims about their offerings. So that is wave one for us. But the challenge is, you know, the microbiome and the microbial landscape lags the human DNA landscape by about 5 years. So it's a non-standard environment, data sets are sparse, And so, you know, there's a lot of maturation required. That's the beginning of the challenge. But I think, you know, we're starting to see some really significant actors make very big announcements about the space and the transformation of the space. For instance, I'm sure the audience are aware of Jennifer Doudna of CRISPR fame. You know, she has just got funding for a big audacious project to figure out how to modulate soil microbes to capture more carbon and to manage the methane cycling in soils. That's a big, big deal. And then some leading thinkers in Sony trying to build the AI systems to solve for what they call the Nobel Turing Prize, to generate scientific outputs from AI systems that are capable of winning Nobel Prizes. So the beginning of the revolution is here. I think it's a long cycle. We're just at the beginning. We're moving beyond, as I say, the object, which is the genome of a particular species, towards that understanding of function, as Dr. Renuka was saying. And I think, you know, like every industry, it will mature, but I think the imperatives, you know, the climate imperative is so significant. There's never been a stimulus like this for the transformation that's, you know, starting to take wing now.
So we're going to see acceleration of these kinds of conversations and AI developments.
Absolutely.
Because the pressure is now, right, with the climate crises that we're facing every day. I promise to let you all ask any questions that you might have of our three soil scientist experts, and maybe by asking your question, you'll get a little closer to becoming one yourself. As Renhua said, we need a few more in this world. Burning question. Yes, Cherie. I think it's coming.
Hi there, I'm Sherry Tan from Bayer. So we talk a lot about the innovations from an R&D perspective. We talk about the farmers. And we don't talk a lot about regulators. And I would just like your view as to how ready are regulators in countries in actually trying to think about soil biome and try and take it to scale.
Thank you so much. Excellent question. Dr. Renuka.
Yeah, I think one of the major barriers for adoption of such biologicals is lack of regulatory, because regulatory currently exists for single microorganisms or probably things that we understand a little bit more about. Newer sets of microorganisms, or where we come to talk about synthetic microbiomes, I think regulatory is really absent in that space. We see the same in the biomolecules that we're developing, so there isn't much of a regulatory framework there. So I think regulatory is a real challenge, but the will is definitely there. A lot of governments are coming up with drafts and seeking responses from startups working actively in this space to give their comments and reframing the regulatory to be ready for not just what's there in the market today, but for probably the next 10 years. It's going to take time, but I think we need to be a little bit more patient with that, as long as the will is there. Maybe Anthony wants to add something here.
I would just say that you know, we're starting to see the regulators put out calls for approaches to enable them to assess live biotherapeutic claims, for instance. So they also appreciate they need data-oriented systems to enable them to make judgments on whether live biotherapeutic approaches in the human food space, but also in the agri space, you know, can be opined on and then delivered. So I think the regulatory environment, once again, in every new industry, we have a complete, you know, shift in a whole range of domains, and the regulatory environment is shifting first slowly, then quickly.
Dr. Nerman, last word.
Yes, for us, we're still working with natural microbe, the tier 1 safety, tier 1, because we think because of the regulation in Thailand, and also we still found amazing microorganism, natural, that have a very good impact on plant performance. We work very close to universities and also the government agency like DOA, the Department of Agriculture, and they have pools of knowledge and proven. So we trying to work with them, and we really welcome collaboration, okay, to solve this soil biology secret.
Excellent. And on that note about collaboration, I'd like to give each of you 30 seconds, because we're running down the clock, to tell us the million-dollar question, really, which is this focus on soil health and regenerative practices going to help us solve the much larger challenge of this 60% increase in production that we have to achieve in order to feed the world? Will we make it? Anthony, you want to kick us off? 30 seconds.
There's no alternative. There's no choice. The chemical approaches to generating yields from soil has run its course. And with the climate imperative, the nutritional crisis, we have no option but to adopt this deeper understanding of natural approaches to solve for the challenge.
I think if we were to take a bet on any singular approach to do this, I think this would be it. If this fails, I don't know what else will work. So I think this is it.
Well, I think this problem is so complex, so we need to work together. That's why I call for collaboration. And I think we not only gonna solve the food security problem, but also the climate change, the drought, and the heat that really impact us now.
Absolutely, thank you. And all three of you have set us really well up for the next panel, which is going to be talking about public-private collaboration and how this kind of collaboration can lead to scaling the kinds of pilots and projects that we see, testing really important innovations in AI and actually taking them to scale and reaching hundreds of thousands of farmers. So it's actually my pleasure, just as we exit the stage, to introduce a brief video that will play on public-private partnership that Grow Asia has been driving together with 600 plus partners since 2015. So enjoy the video, as we will also give a very warm round of applause to our expert soil scientists, thanking them for helping us become a little more aware today. Thank you, all three of you.
so much for the previous panel on the soil health. I think I learned a bit more. And if you don't have enough time, please do feel free to catch up with the panelists right after this. For the next panel on achieving food security through private-public partnerships, I'd like to invite Bev Posma from Grow Asia, Saran Song from Amru Rice, John Cheng from Innovate 360, and moderating the panel, Hitesh Tak from BCG Group. Welcome.
So today, more than 800 million people would be going to bed hungry. And we are going to add another 2 billion by 2050, more mouths to feed. Right? Now, arid land occupies close to around 40% or more than a third of the landmass today. And with climatic shocks, it's going to only get severe. If you were to solve for one problem for humanity, food security is probably at the top of the pyramid. But we'll need and require all partnerships to come together. Government agencies, public, private, all hands on deck. And that's what the topic of discussion today is. I'm Hitesh. I'm a managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group. I lead the agri-commodities sector for the region, for the firm. And joining me today is a very accomplished and our panel, right? And let me start with you, Bev. So our first panelist is Beverly Posma. Bev is an executive director at Grow Asia. She has been the CEO of Harvest Plus. She has been CEO of RSPO and has been the executive director for Food Industry Asia. She is a hands-on CEO, a strategist, and an ESG specialist with more than 2 decades of experience in food sector. Next down, we have Saran Song. Now, Saran is the co-founder and CEO for Amru Rice. He is very passionate about bringing positive change in the lives of Cambodian rice farmers or smallholders. And his commitment for organic farming and sustainable practices are nothing short of legendary. Next we have, and finally we have John Chang, young and yet seasoned director from Innovate 360, a venture capitalist who built innovation ecosystem platform, feed 9 billion, and it couldn't have been more apt, John. Yeah. So please welcome to the 3 amazing panelists with a warm round of applause. Let me start with you, Bev. You're doing some phenomenal work at Grow Asia. We saw the video just now, the plane, and it's amazing to see how you're bringing so many different stakeholders together. But there are so many jargons that are actually going around in the industry today, and pardon me for using that word. But how do we interpret different PPP models that are floating around, and what are your experiences?
Thank you, Hitesh, for that great question. Allow me first just to thank Renhua and the Taiwan team for bringing us all together. If there's one thing I've learned about partnership is that they don't happen by accident. They start with a conversation, and we need to make more time for those conversations. So thank you, Taiwan, for truly emulating what partnership means to Grow Asia. The definitions, they catch us out. We do tend to use language without necessarily stopping to think about, are we all talking about the same thing? Public-private partnerships, I think, are probably the hardest types of partnership. And sometimes we take very different approaches to public-private partnership. All I can say is, in my experience, there is no one-size-fits-all. Most partnerships are brokered by usually a third entity. Sometimes, particularly public-private entities, you need that neutral broker to recognize that you're dealing with two very different sectors of society that have often different agendas and different objectives. But a solid partnership starts by finding the one common goal. And good public-private partnerships are essential if we're to achieve these bigger goals of solving some of the challenges in the food system we've been talking about today. I also think that partnerships are a little bit like marriages. I'm afraid I'm a closet viewer of the Netflix series Indian Matchmaker. I don't know if you've seen it, but I had the great honor to meet Seema Auntie, the real Seema Auntie, in the flesh a few months ago. And, you know, she's an amazing woman that manages to create perfect partnerships. And I asked her what makes the perfect partnership, and she said, there is no such thing as a perfect partnership. The best marriages and the best partnerships are usually getting it about 60% right. And I think that's true for most public-private partnerships. You know, you should shoot for 100%, but let's face it, 60% is a good place to start.
Wonderful. Wonderful answer. And, you know, Amru Rice, you have gotten it more than 60% right, so Seema Auntie must be very happy. So if I were to actually turn to you, and if you could share how you cracked that ecosystem enablement, and that's something that you really, you know, that really fascinates us about Amru Rice. So could you please share about the enablement and the policy enablement programs that's been running in Cambodia?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Kun Ren Ho, and all Taiwan team for organizing this event and invite me. Good afternoon to all audience. Thank you for question. Let me elaborate a little bit on Amru Rice. We are the local company that create a platform where grower can produce rice for own consumptions and export. So we've been having partnership with farmers, 100 farmers in 2013. To now we have more than 10,000 farmers throughout the nations. We have only rice in 2011, and now we have 4. We have rice, cassava, cashew nut, and vegetable. So I would share you why we success on this. And of course, we call public-private partnership, but we are finding a new one. We add producers. So we have 4 Ps, meaning public-private producer partnerships, where we can get more closer. What platform we do? So the platform we do, we want to address the food security. We want them to get enough good food to eat. Second, we want them to improve quality and the quantity for export and generate income to support their family. And number 3, we can say it a jobs, because when you build this some commercial level, it become a job for them. But the job is gonna be not sufficient if you do only rice. Of course, rice like 60% having on their own business, but we have other crops that can create another income. So they can live, they can stay in the community without migration. So where we work in a partnership, not alone, Amru, we have worked with many private sector from upstream to downstream. So all the value chain are connected. Like, for example, we have Amru Rice, we have Taiwan, for example. We work together hand to hand and develop a system that farmer can, you know, ecosystem can connect it to Amru Rice standard, and as well as the processing qualities they want. Last one, I would say financing, because why? It's unlock financing issues. Looking back 10 years ago, Cambodia farmers, for example, in no way to get funds or loaned. But when we get in our platform partnership, it builds more trust with them, and the bank see the record, the money flow in their account. It make them more reliable, you know, in access financing. Last, you know, partnership with government is another testing, because government would like to see why it's effective. Because when the Amru do 100 farmers, government join us as the witness. They just want to see how this partnership engagement, we call it marry, you know, like a marry. So where is the marry earned, when, something like that. So I can say partnership is a long way to go. We treat equally, whether they are indigenous people, women, poor, we are in need them to be equal treatment. So the way we do are very equal and share prosperity together, open together, transparency. So we get more and more farmer enrolled in AMRU system, in supply chain system. Thank you. Maybe next question.
So Sharan is an amazingly humble person. They have cracked the code. You know? So I would have to say that you're not only a marquee player in Cambodia, you are clearly leading the pack in the whole region. Let me actually bring in John. So John, you are a venture capitalist. You have gone around working with startups. So what role do you believe that startups will have to play in food security? And how would you describe your journey as well in that?
Sure. Again, thank you, Renhua, as well as the Taiwan team for having me. And to answer that question, I think the role of startups is a very important role. It's really about disrupting, or not even disrupting, but improving and helping the pace of innovation, improving the efficiency of our systems right now. But more importantly, it's also a means of finding ways to do something that you've been doing for many years, but in a more improved way. And so, simply put, the startups are quite the key to food security. And how we go about doing it is simply, we're trying to build an ecosystem as well, like our players here as well as Daihua and a lot of others in Asia. What we started, so just going on to the theme of what we're talking about today about private-public partnership, is that when we first started, it was, so I come from a sugar business. 2018, we decided to create an innovation arm. And we didn't know how, and we wanted to tap on the startups to see how they could help us on this journey as well. At the same time, we were looking at interesting products that we could bring through our distribution channels, so we tapped on them, and then we also help ourselves as well. And then we also work very closely with the government to bring together the startups, the innovation. We tried to, 2018 we started Feed 9 Billion. That's where we brought the government together with private companies, public companies together, and startups to try to feed 9.8 billion people, and then that's a really big goal. And so what we did was to try to raise awareness of food sustainability innovation through collaboration. And just last year, together with the Singapore Tourism Board, for example, we launched the Singapore Restaurant Week, and that was together with not one but 4 cell-based companies. We had a special regulatory sandbox where we featured cell-based foods at the event, really to try to get consumers to be more perceptive to cultivated meat. So, it's that relationship that we try to bring startups together, help them on their regulatory journey, help them to scale up. So we also have facilities that enable them to grow. So we have co-working spaces, kitchen, labs, production spaces, and then of course we tap on our traditional business to help them leverage onto that network as well. So that's some of the things that we're doing.
It's so interesting because right before this panel, I was having conversation with Bev, Sharan, and they were exactly talking about the same thing, ecosystem connectivity. And that brings me to the point you were trying to mention, Bev, earlier off the stage. When you think about ecosystem connectivity that John just mentioned, government, we are largely dependent on government incentives and investments. Asia, particularly, slowly the funds have started to dry, especially given the whole volatility. What roles do you see private players playing here, especially VCs like John's?
Yeah, ecosystem is such an important word, but it makes everything more complex. The more people you have trying to build partnership, the slower the partnership is. To coin a Bill Gates phrase, I'd like to think of myself as an impatient optimist. I want to go fast, and I believe we can solve problems if we work together. But there's also an old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But I, as an optimist, believe we can actually go fast and far. Grow Asia has been described as having the heart of an NGO. We're focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, transformation of food systems to address the inequalities that we currently see, and addressing climate change. But not just having the heart of an NGO, but having the agility of a startup. We need to go fast, but also using the tools of multinational companies. And I think that is this challenge we have in building ecosystems. We need ecosystems that go fast and far. And one of the challenges that I see is making sure that capital flows, money, is being spent smartly on the right things. I don't actually think we have a shortage of capital to solve climate change and food security. I think our challenge is that capital is currently very siloed. Investments are made for very quick project solutions. And ecosystem is bigger than a project. Ecosystem is smart partnerships. And I really enjoyed listening to Kathy's comments from ADB in that she was talking about the importance of technical assistance. There's another jargon word. But technical assistance is vital for ecosystem building and for delivering solutions. And I think Kathy said that good technical assistance, I might paraphrase you, Kathy, sorry. I think you said it must be high value, low cost, and deliver a development impact. And I think that was beautiful. I've never heard technical assistance described in such clarity before. And I think Grow Asia's impact funds, you may be surprised at the small dollar numbers. And in fact, I do want to say that we launched them earlier in the year, and we've now exceeded those numbers for every single fund. So it does show you that there is a need there for good technical assistance across an ecosystem basis. But good technical assistance must also be smart. The challenge we see is that within the ecosystem, we've got money for technical assistance for smallholder farmers being spent in lots and lots of siloed pockets. Governments typically invest either within Asia through their ASEAN integration funding, through their own national policy mechanisms, and also you have governments outside of Asia investing through the aid mechanism, through the overseas development aid mechanism. That technical assistance is valuable and doing a good job, but it's going to farmers that are not necessarily part of the value chains that are sitting in this room. Meanwhile, you've got private sector technical assistance, quite rightly supporting and removing barriers to growth within your own value chains. But what happens to the hundreds of millions of businesses that are sitting somewhere in the middle that are getting no technical assistance? So I think we need to use ecosystems and partnership to be smarter in the deployment of technical assistance. I would imagine that pretty much every business in this room has a small or medium-sized business somewhere in its growth trajectory. If you're making food or smart food, you probably need smart suppliers, and they're going to be small and medium-sized agricultural businesses. If you're designing technology and agricultural solutions, your customer is going to be a small and medium-sized enterprise. If we're to meet these huge increases for consumer demand for food in this region, that go-to-market strategy is going to have small and medium-sized businesses in that trajectory. If we don't help the businesses themselves become those suppliers or customers of the future, we're missing the biggest investment opportunity this region faces. So technical assistance is a business opportunity as well as a moral imperative. I always find it very queasy sitting in an audience talking about smallholder farmers when there's none here. But I know that many of you are having those daily conversations with farmers, and that's so vital. And I'll finish with just one insight. Technical assistance must be smart. It must be targeted to the problem we're trying to solve. I was in Papua New Guinea just a few months ago, and I met with some women coffee farmers who have mobilized 1,000 farmers, aggregated together to supply high-quality coffee. And I said to her, what do you need in order to connect your product to market, to make sure that these businesses are successful businesses? And she said, I just wish they'd stop sending me helicopters when I need a motorbike. And I think she was talking about drones. There was an NGO that was helping them get drone technology. And it was a classic example that these businesses didn't need drone technology just then. They just needed motorbikes to get their coffee down the mountain and to the market.
Wonderful. You know, what excites me about GrowAsia is the fact that you are prioritizing impact over returns, and that actually goes a long way. I have one quick question for Saran. Saran, what role does product differentiation or cross-border value chain play in solving for the challenges that you see today? I know that you are running many of these value chains across multiple crops.
Yeah, of course, in context of Cambodia, or I think maybe other poor, least developed countries, we have a lot of bottleneck on the supply chain. First is ecosystem and the connectivity, and many of the farmers cannot process locally, and they have been a long way to transfer and cross-border. Second, I would say education and, let's say, mentoring, because we are lack of a diversified, knowledge on how create, innovate, and develop things that can address their bottleneck. Education play a very important role, where we can see it's a long-term investment to address these issues. I would recommend to have a program to support in terms of entrepreneurship in communities. Set up the group and have them, let's say a youth lead group to help them transform their business, to ensure connect from their farm to the factories. I think about why we can form a digital where we can address this in Asia, where we can see farmer in Thailand, Cambodia, where we harvest, especially burden in harvest season, where sometimes it's too much that farmer in Cambodia produce, where Thailand not allowed to get in, but Vietnam cannot. But sometimes they need, we don't have. So probably we need some data to analyze some crop needed to address these issues among Asia, because we are producing country for the world. But sometimes we affect by the way of the cross-border and protectionism, and also think about the effect to the other farmers produce the same things. So I would say technology is another one that we should look on long-term investment to create a digital and data to ensure we can address the common issues for the Asian farmers. We need the government, public, very important, have demonstrate their own a policy, and also put in the budget, because many time budget mainly go to the private company, where of course private company play a very effective role in addressing issues, but government need to have ownership to carry on and develop the this in their own framework of policy, or policy especially is to the upstream, to the farm. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question for the youngest panel member here before I open it up for the questions from the audience. We spoke a lot about challenges. We spoke a lot about solutions around it, and so on and so forth. What is it that we are doing right today? If you were to don your optimistic hat and talk about what can we do more of?
So I think, today is a testament of what we're doing right, which is trying to bring people together who are interested in this space. I think what needs to be done more, to continue this relationship with every single one of you in this room to come together with a common goal, whether or not it's trying to feed 9.8 billion people, whether or not it's trying to build have conversations around the agri-food tech sector, but really, finding ways to collaborate. I think that's something that we need to do more, not just talk, but actually to collaborate more. So I think that's something from me.
That's very well put. I know we are short of time, but maybe we can open up for a question or two from the audience for the panelists. Please.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your insights. Sir, I'm Thor from Ecogenomics. You may have heard from Anthony just now. Thank you very much for your presentation today. This is more like an open question, sir, but I'm keen to know more within the context of ASEAN or APAC at large. Who do you see should be the drivers of the initiative? Knowing that it's a cross collaboration, you still need some sort of fire starter, spark starter. Who do you see from your perspective, be that person or be that entity that lead the initiative?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think the answer, I hate to beat around the bush, is that everyone. Grow Asia was established on the principle that public money needs to anchor development and private money needs to anchor business. But you've got to put it together, and technical assistance needs to be blended. So who should start that? Well, probably everyone in this room that needs technical assistance in their business model. But I would ask everyone just to stop and think before you just go and deliver a solution. How can you combine your TA money with someone else's TA money to make it go faster and further?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on. Yeah, anyone can do it. It's really about finding the other person's strength or the other company's strength, and then looking at how you can leverage to run faster and run further together.
Wonderful. We are out of time. This is a very interesting conversation. We'll probably do it off stage during lunch and the coffee. But I just wanted to thank the panelists, the organizers, and as well as thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Another round of applause for the panelists, please.
Thank you so much, Hitesh, Bev, Saran, and John, for that very insightful thing. And I love the quote from you, Bev. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Partnership is never 100%. We just got to start somewhere. 60%, we'll take that odds, okay? For the next panel, right before lunch, on the agri-food investment landscape in 2023, joining us on the panel is Ritu Verma from Anchor Capital, Nitsa Kardish from Trendlines Group, Marie Chong from Wavemaker Impact, and moderating the panel, John Friedman from Ag Funder. Welcome.
Does anybody need just to do a little leg stretch? I know we've been sitting for a couple sessions here. All right, everyone up. We've got last panel. I know we're in a very dangerous position, preventing you from enjoying the delicious lunch that's been prepared. Okay, shake it around a little bit. All right, just a couple, 3 big breaths. All right, let's get the oxygen flowing again. We're going to try to make this faster. Everyone, please take a seat. We're going to try to make this a fast-paced, hopefully insightful panel on the flow of capital in this obviously very important sector, which we're all participating in. And by virtue of the fact that you're all here today spending time, you have all invested your time and energies to be part of this very important conversation. So I'm joined on the stage by 3 fantastic investors with mandates spanning Southeast Asia, India, Middle East, and the broader globe. These three ladies are not simply venture capitalists, they are also technology builders, impact advocates, and ecosystem engineers. In the last panel, Bev mentioned that private capital or private money should be driving businesses. So we're going to spend a few moments just to analyze the trend of capital flows and understand where are the investor dollars going. As we look at the agri-food industry and recognize it's such a enormous sector for one to be investing in, when we consider the value chain all the way from upstream through sort of supply chain and midstream down to sort of foods and the consumer end of the spectrum. So where is all the money going? Maybe just to set the scene, 2022 was obviously a pretty tough year for venture capital as a whole. Agri-food tech as a sector was certainly not spared. Headline numbers from AgFunder's most recent investment report reveal $29.6 billion invested globally across the sector. That's down about 44% year on year compared to 2021's record-breaking year by all accounts. Within that $29.6 billion globally, Asia Pacific, which we include China and India, attracted $8.6 billion of investment, making it the second largest region after North America in terms of agri-food tech investment. Southeast Asia saw about 1.47, let's call it $1.5 billion, raised by regional Southeast Asian startups in 2022, equating to approximately 5% of the global pie. Now, I don't have to repeat the statistics from earlier, but clearly 5% or even a third is a long delta and gap compared to the actual population and the sort of consumer demands that Asia will account for. Nonetheless, a slightly more positive spin to that final statistic, $1.5 billion in Southeast Asia was only a relatively marginal decrease of 25% compared to the 2021 statistics. So with all of that said, opening easy question for you all. What are some of your observations from the past 12 months, and perhaps how have each of your investment strategies perhaps changed given the challenging macro backdrop that we've all faced? Ritu, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, thank you for that, and thanks for having me here on the panel. So super excited to be talking about the region. So of course, 2022 has had a slowdown in India, as most other geographies. But from where I sit, I would have a more positive outlook on this. I think the slowdown is lower in ag tech. So I think we had about a 20 to 30% decrease in funding. But in a much more qualitative way, the interest in ag tech from a lot of generalist investors has grown tremendously over the last couple of years because, the resilience of investing in agriculture and food remains. And so when other industries tank, you see money shifting to things that are working. And I think that's also driven by, on ground, the ag tech companies and sort of their performances. Despite funding slowdowns, you realize you're addressing some very critical gaps and problems in the ecosystem. So hence, you're not quite facing the headwinds as a business as much as per other sectors. So from where I sit, I think it's it's actually a very resilient sector. Yes, the dollars that flew the years before was very high, but that was based on macro conditions of having a lot of, capital that had to find a place to go. So I think we're in a good state, Though having said that, of course, a lot more money, given the size of the sector, can come in. I mean, we don't track at ThinkAg, which is an ecosystem initiative in India. We don't track the restaurant tech or the delivery guys, but if we take a look at the food and ag, and we don't do the brands also as part of that, but if you look at the ag and the ag-linked kind of stuff, I think it's still about $1 billion or so. So, that number is very small. Yeah, it's really, really small for the size of the industry that is there, but it's been on the upward trend, and I think that's a positive thing. I'll stop there.
Thanks. We'll come back to ThinkAg. Nitsa, how about you?
Yeah, when you ask where does all money goes, I wanted to say it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, for the last 12 months, I think that most of the investors are really holding back and looking much carefully on their investment. From my experience and in our activity, we really very careful with new investment. We are keeping most of the money for our portfolio because the climate, the financial climate, on top of the other problems with climate, is really not encouraging. It's not only in the Middle East, but we saw a few, the financial crisis and the Silicon Valley Bank, and in Israel, on top of that, we have specific issues now that influence all the investment in startups. But on top of that, I think that most investors will look on the bottom line. Companies has to show more than the technology is what are the business model, is it really profitable, that they know exactly who are the clients, what they will do. And when we speak about growth or exits, growth means really much more sales and profit. And all investors, bottom line, would like to see, a nice ROI for their investments. There are some ideology behind our investment philosophy, but bottom line, we need to bring for our investors the ROI that they are expecting to.
Thanks. Yeah, I think in terms of ideologies, certainly the ideologies that as investors we would be advising or championing our portfolio companies to think about. Certainly you mentioned growth, right? Growth at all costs has clearly been turned on its head. We need that sort of path to profitability now, and the belts have been tightened. Marie, before coming to you, I think I just wanted to make mention of the fact within Southeast Asia, just a couple other statistics to bear in mind. Obviously, a much younger, more nascent ecosystem, both in terms of venture capital as well as obviously the agri-food tech sector within that. Looking at the numbers from last year, Indonesia, unsurprisingly, still in the top spot. Number one in agri-food tech investment across Southeast Asia, and in fact, the only Southeast Asian nation to make the global top 10, accounting for almost half of all of Southeast Asia's investment. After that, actually came Thailand, claiming the number 2 spot, jumping ahead of Singapore by about $10 million. So Thai startups raised about $290 million last year, and then Singapore was in number 3. Now, Mary, perhaps you could share a little bit about what Wavemaker Impact's doing, and putting into context some of these statistics and considerations around relative maturity of different markets, different category solutions. Where are the opportunities that you see today in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks everyone for having us on this panel. So Wavemaker Impact, we launched about 18 months ago with a mission to build a portfolio of companies that can abate 10% of the global carbon budget. So we're after 5 gigatons of impact. And we do that by building what we call 100 by 100 companies. So companies with the ability to abate 100 megatons of carbon emissions equivalent and be $100 million businesses at scale. So John, maybe to loop back to your first question, which is where's all the money going? It's all going to climate, right? So climate is growing 5 times faster than any other VC category. It has not seen the slowdown that other spaces have seen. And I think it's because of this growing recognition that climate change really is the challenge of our generation, our time. And it's something where, venture capital and all kinds of capital is required to solve. So in terms of the opportunities in the region, 50% of emissions come from a combination of land use change and agriculture in our region. And indeed, 5 out of 6 of our portfolio companies are focused in ag. And I think more interesting actually is the number of entrepreneurs, because that's our model, right? To work with experienced entrepreneurs, to point them in the direction of these climate tech opportunities that exist today, that are business model innovation led rather than deep tech or science, the interest from entrepreneurs has been incredible in the ag space. I think everybody recognizes that ag sits at this sweet spot between sort of food security, livelihoods, particularly for some of the poorest farmers in the region, and then finally climate. So I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity. And every time we get a new entrepreneur, we kind of, in the back of our minds, we say, another one? And can we build another ag tech startup? And so far, the business models have been so different, tackling this problem from so many different angles, from, equipment replacement, replacing diesel irrigation pumps with solar irrigation pumps, which is where our portfolio company Agros has started, to biochar, which our portfolio company WasteX is, to decarbonizing rice cultivation, to addressing degraded land in Indonesia, and then agroforestry in Vietnam. So, just a whole span of different ways where business model innovation, where, the opportunity to create efficiencies that generate real value from a very fragmented supply chain and value chain exist, where it's possible to, create a tremendous amount of value from a dollar term perspective, save, a significant amount of carbon, and then return that value to the people that are actually cultivating and producing our food in the region.
Thanks, Marie. Ritu, maybe coming back to you. Obviously, Marie spoke a lot about different business models. Obviously, tackling the problem within the Southeast Asia context. Again, a region which is generally much younger in terms of entrepreneurial talent, perhaps depth of the venture capital ecosystem as a whole. Let's compare that to India, where your primary investment focus is. Anchor Capital's obviously been investing, not specifically, or I should say exclusively, in agri-food tech, but obviously with a strong lens and sort of bias towards solutions within this sector. What are some of your learnings over, say, the past decade? How have you seen the Indian market evolve, and what are some of the lessons that we could perhaps look to apply to Southeast Asia, perhaps?
Well, thank you, John. I think that's, I find that a fairly interesting question. And over the last decade, I've been doing this for over a decade, and at Anchor, ag and food has been close to 3/4 of our portfolio from very different lenses, including digital, including food brands, including, deep science investments. And one of the things that I have seen over time as this evolves is that the Southeast Asia landscape, and I like to think about it as market structures, that smallholder farming drives certain market structures. So while we might talk about the farm size, we should also talk about the supply chains that serve smallholder farming, whether it's things going in or things going out. And that defines a food and agri landscape that is very similar across the region. So in India, what we've seen over the last 10 years, the predominance of growth of, at the downstream end, and investment in the downstream end. And if you reflect back, one of the things that you realize is that, to get a small farmer to spend money is very difficult. So it typically happens at the time of buying, and the person who is intermediating at that buying stage. And I've seen that in, with our companies that have gone on to Southeast Asia. We have a company called Captain Fresh that works in the Southeast in Indonesia, and very similar supply chains. So they're in the seafood business in India, the seafood business in Indonesia. When you're working with much smaller lots, requires the digital supply chains to be built out in the offtake space, which then intermediates back with the farmer because it needs to upgrade its quality. So the spend comes from that side. So 80% of money in India goes into these downstream businesses, and I think it's the same in Southeast Asia, is the one piece I've seen. I think the other important piece to point out, and I think Marie alluded to some of this, is I think that we live in particular microclimatic zones. High capital expenditure is not a feature of these regions. It's not a feature in India. I don't think it's a feature in Southeast Asia as well. So we need the technologies, and here's where I think the science technologies for these regions are very, very important, that can work in these market structures. So let's take, we spoke about decarbonization of rice. It's a major problem globally. Majority of the rice is grown in this region. We do need the inputs that can work towards the decarbonization of rice. So we're invested in a synthetic biology company where there's a 60-70% reduction in GHGs when you apply that to rice. We need these technologies for this region, right? I think while we may talk about alt protein, we need to be talking about alt rice as well. And the region needs to drive these, right? So we need, we need the genomics and the phenomics, the seed discoveries for these microclimatic zones. And I think that's the other area which is not as large today, but I think we will see that growing immensely over the next decade. We've seen that growing in India. We will see that growing in Southeast Asia. The applicability of that is all the way across the region.
Yeah, I would like to add on that, a lot changed along the years. We started investing in agri-tech. Now it's agri-food, 12 years ago. And we'll take the vertical farming or urban farming field. So at the beginning, it was, more and more big infrastructure to grow leafy greens. Nowadays, we are looking at this area, but only from the genetic perspective, because we all know that if we want to make it meaningful and we want to really make a change for the urban population, it has to be a different approach. We have to be able to grow high value, high calorie crops that has less and less waste. So this is an example how the dynamic in the market changed. So we definitely looked at those genetic approach in different crops. And also we now understand that the way to grow is changing, and you have to use much more efficient way. By the way, this is an opportunity for me to comment on the previous, two previous panel regarding the fact or the statement that we have to produce more. I think that it's not true. This is the most problematic attitude, because when we are producing more, we are using more and more resources that this planet has. We don't have. So we have to produce in much more efficient way, in a different way, and we have to take care of our 40% food waste, for example, and that will make a much bigger change than think that we have to produce more and more. So for example, we look for cellular biology or cell biology for food ingredients production, like our portfolio company Equinome and Phytolon, that are targeting the food value chain in a different stages. So that's the way we look at our new field of investment.
I think just to back up some of these comments with the trends that we've observed over the last few years, analyzing the investment flows, you're absolutely right. We've seen a significant drop-off in funding going towards the downstream sectors, especially marketplaces. E-grocery, food delivery, obviously received a lot of attention, a lot of capital flowing in post-COVID when we were all reliant on these technologies. But the sort of more defensive, more constructive sectors that we've seen is more capital going towards upstream, genomics, agri, biotech, et cetera, which is, I guess, it's encouraging, to say the least.
But you need those fundamental tools, right? So digital gets you so far, right? And it's a very important tool in this part of the world. But you also need the fundamental tools, right? Digital can't solve the problems completely, so.
I think last question to the panel before I open it up to the floor, but maybe, Marie, in your operations in Southeast Asia, and I'm going to try to weave the other views in as well, are there any gaps? So taking perhaps a little bit more of a critical or constructive criticism view in terms of how the Southeast Asia landscape, or going back to the term used before, market structure or ecosystem structure, what are we missing? And maybe, representing the OG of agri-tech, Israel, like what are the ingredients in place which has made Israel such a transformative leader in innovation? And same thing with India, again, being a much more developed agri-tech market. Is there anything that you can identify from the outside looking in which we are lacking?
First, I think that each region and each country has to build its own very unique story. I mean, you can't copy-paste, okay, but you can take some ingredients, some elements. Israel is a place with a lot of problems, so that's why we are so innovative. We have no choice. And that's why you have this entrepreneurial spirit, and people are taking risks like this is the thing that you do every morning. You take risks. When I came to Singapore, which I love, not to be in risky atmosphere all the time, taking risk is something less common. So, and being an entrepreneur, that's the first thing. But the similar facts are that the government support, the private money that comes in, the ideation, and I can see that in Singapore and also in, of course, in Israel and other countries, mixing all that together needs somebody that will take responsibility on that. Like, it's said that it takes a village to grow a child. It takes an ecosystem, a strong ecosystem, to support startups.
I think maybe to kind of jump in on this and kind of, what I feel one of the linchpins could be is it talks to the first panel. The first panel was talking about what was their wish list, and they talked a lot about digitization and digital tools coming to farmers in the region. I actually think it's around a financial backbone that could actually connect smallholder farmers much better to access to financial services. I had a great conversation with a potential LP the other day, and they were telling us about input financing in Kenya, and it was all made possible because of M-Pesa. And that's the point. I think several panels have talked about it. Where does the money kind of change hands, and how can you return more of that value to the people that produce our food? And I think a lot of that has to do around transparency of the financial system. So I think, Nitsa, I completely agree, right? I think this needs an ecosystem approach, but I suppose if I had a wish list, it would be around creating that backbone that would enable farmers to use digital tools to manage their cash, to have visibility over transactions, which could help disintermediate a very murky kind of supply chain, particularly upstream. And I think it's something where startups could then plug into that and then create a whole range of innovative solutions and tools that could support agri-food in the region.
I'm very conscious of time, but do we have any questions from the audience? Probably got 30 seconds for one, if there's any desperate questions to our panel of investors. Otherwise, nope, going once, twice, three times, gone. Quick speed date, yeah, lunch. What's your next investment going to be? Go. In which area, which market? 30 seconds.
We have two coming up, both
Okay.
in the ag space.
A little bit more detailed than that.
It's the two that I mentioned earlier, the agroforestry company in Vietnam and degraded land in Indonesia.
Awesome. Litsa? Or follow-on capital, right?
Sorry?
Favorite follow-on capital, right? Because there's no new investments.
It probably be on soil health and carbon economy.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Very topical. You too?
No new capital right now, so again, follow on, but the supply chain stuff. So we've actually seen very interesting innovations in the supply chains when they're verticalized. And so I think there's a lot more opportunity and a lot more verticalized to go back deeper and go back to farm level to make those changes. So those are exciting.
That is an excellent layup for our panel coming straight after lunch, talking about supply chains of the Indian market. But with that, let's wrap it up. Please join me in giving our panelists a warm round of applause. And I'm sure, I think Cam's going to introduce the lunch offerings, or?
Thank you
Yes,
so
all right.
much. Okay, I'm going to get on stage. Thanks, John. Thank you so much, everyone. Yes, it's lunchtime, but just before we break, I just wanted to thank our partners who have been very generous and helping us prepare the lunch for everyone today. At Greens, Alchemy, Banyan Tree, Double Dragon, Rose Brand, Salad Stop, Thai Union, Tipco, and V Foods. So please enjoy, and we'll be back at 1:45. Thank you.